July 15, 2018, 3:47 p.m. The thermometer on the pristine porch of 1242 Maple Drive read 97 degrees. But the real story wasn't the Memphis heat. Behind the freshly painted cream walls and meticulously maintained rose gardens of this East Memphis showpiece, a tragedy was about to unfold that would shatter the carefully constructed illusions of Magnolia Heights forever. Sarah Mitchell's Victorian mansion stood as a monument to perfection, every blade of grass measured, every window gleaming in the Tennessee sun. But perfection, as the residents of this exclusive suburb would soon learn, often comes at a devastating price. The thing about Sarah, Barbara Watson would later tell the grand jury, her hands trembling around a glass of water, was that she worked so hard to make everything look perfect. Maybe too hard. Sarah Mitchell hadn't always been the widow of Maple Drive. 8 months ago, she'd been Sarah Mitchell, wife of James Mitchell, one of Memphis's most successful real estate developers. At 42, she was what her friends called preserved, a woman who fought aging with the same determination she'd once used to climb the real estate rankings. Her chocolate brown hair was always freshly highlighted, her tennis skirts precisely the right length to suggest country club propriety while hinting at something more. The $2 million life insurance policy James left her meant she never had to work again. The 4-bedroom Victorian meant she had space to host the neighborhood's most coveted dinner parties. But money couldn't fill the silence in her king-sized bed, couldn't replace the sound of her husband's keys in the door every evening at 6. After James died, something changed in her eyes. Lisa Anderson, her next-door neighbor, would observe during the investigation. Like she was hungry for something money couldn't buy. That hunger found its target in Kevin Anderson, Lisa's 17-year-old son. 6 feet 2 inches of junior Olympic swimming potential living just over the pristine hedge that separated their properties. Team captain with a 4.2 GPA and shoulders that made the mothers at Swim Meets Whisper behind their hands. The University of Texas had already dangled a full scholarship in front of him, contingent on his performance at the state championships. Kevin was different from the other boys, Coach Thompson would testify. More mature, maybe too mature for his own good. You see it sometimes with kids raised by single parents. They grow up too fast. Lisa Anderson had raised Kevin alone since his father disappeared with his secretary and most of their savings when Kevin was 5. Working double shifts in the Methodist Hospital ER, she'd somehow managed to get them into Magnolia Heights, determined to give her son the opportunities she never had. The swimming scholarship was supposed to be their ticket to something better. I should have seen it coming, Lisa would sob in the witness stand months later. The signs were all there. The new clothes he couldn't explain. The late-night texts. The way he started missing morning practice to help Mrs. Mitchell with the yard. What kind of yard work happens at 7 a.m.? James Mitchell's death had been sudden. A massive heart attack during his morning jog. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The health-conscious businessman who never smoked, never drank, dropped dead on the running trail he'd helped fund through his charitable foundation. He left behind not just a grieving widow, but a legacy of community involvement that made Sarah's position in neighborhood society untouchable. Or so everyone thought. Barbara Watson, a retired English teacher whose bay window offered a perfect view of the Mitchell property, kept a detailed diary of neighborhood activities, a habit she'd never broken since her teaching days. Her entries would later become crucial to Detective Michael Torres's investigation. The boy was over there all the time, she would tell him, flipping through pages of careful observations. At first, it seemed innocent enough. A teenager helping a widow with house maintenance. But then I noticed the way she watched him from her kitchen window. The way her hand would linger on his arm during their conversations. I taught high school for 30 years, detective. I know what trouble looks like before it happens. Coach Thompson had been the first to notice the changes in Kevin's performance. The boy who'd been seconds away from breaking the state record in the 200-meter freestyle was suddenly struggling to maintain his captain position. His times started slipping in June, Thompson would report. I asked if everything was okay at home. He said he was just tired from doing extra work to help his mom with bills. I should have pushed harder for answers. Detective Michael Torres, a 20-year veteran of Memphis homicide, would later piece together the pattern that everyone had seen but struggling with grief and loneliness. A teenage boy mature beyond his years. carrying the weight of his mother's sacrifices. A neighborhood too focused on maintaining appearances to see the tragedy unfolding behind perfectly trimmed hedges. In cases like these, Torres would later write in his report, "Everyone thinks they know the whole story. The grieving widow, the helpful neighbor boy, the concerned community. But behind closed doors, behind those perfect facades, there's always another layer. And sometimes, peeling back those layers reveals something that no one wants to see." Sarah Mitchell maintained her social calendar with military precision that summer: Wednesday book club, Thursday tennis, Sunday brunch at the country club. Everything designed to show the world she was handling widowhood with grace and dignity. But the cracks were starting to show. She started missing tennis matches, her doubles partner would later recall. She who never missed a game, not even the week after James died. And when she did show up, she seemed distracted, kept checking her phone. We all assumed she was dating again. We just never imagined. The stage was set. The players were in position. And in the stifling heat of a Memphis summer, behind the pristine facade of 1242 Maple Drive, a story of desire, desperation, and death was about to unfold that would leave an entire community questioning everything they thought they knew about their perfect neighborhood. Magnolia Heights wasn't just any Memphis suburb. It was a carefully orchestrated symphony of old money and new ambitions. Streets named after flowers curved gracefully between homes that started at 7 figures, each one trying to outshine its neighbor while pretending not to try at all. The kind of neighborhood where gardeners arrived every Thursday at exactly 9 a.m. And deviation from this schedule was cause for urgent discussion at the Weekend Garden Club. The Mitchell house sat at the intersection of Maple Drive and Magnolia Circle, commanding attention from every angle. A 3-story Victorian painted in historical cream with hunter green trim. It boasted original stained glass windows that cast colorful shadows across the wraparound porch. The house had been James's wedding gift to Sarah, purchased when she was still a rising star at Memphis Elite Realty. The layout was like something from Architectural Digest, Detective Torres would note in his initial report. Main floor, formal living room, dining room, gourmet kitchen opening to a family room with French doors leading to the pool area. Second floor, master suite, 3 bedrooms converted to a home office, library, and gym. Third floor, what Mrs. Mitchell called her private retreat, significant to the case's later developments. But it was the pool house that would become the focal point of the investigation. A recent addition James had completed just months before his death. It featured a changing area, full bathroom, and a small kitchenette. The perfect pool house for entertaining, Sarah had once boasted at a garden club meeting. She didn't know then how those words would come back to haunt her. The social hierarchy of Magnolia Heights operated on subtle but rigid rules. At the top sat the founding families, those who'd been there since the suburb's inception in the 1960s. The Mitchells, despite their wealth, were relatively new money, just 12 years in the neighborhood. But James's philanthropy and Sarah's social finesse had earned them acceptance among the elite. The Andersons, living in what was arguably the most modest home in Magnolia Heights, existed on the periphery of this social structure. Lisa's position as an ER nurse garnered respect, but her single mother status and mortgage struggles kept her from full acceptance into the inner circle. 8 months after James's death, the neighborhood was still adjusting to its new dynamic. Sarah's position had shifted, no longer half of Magnolia Heights' power couple, but not quite relegated to the ranks of the other widows who lived quietly with their memories and cats. She existed in a sort of social limbo, maintained by her wealth and her legendary dinner parties. The summer of 2018 pressed down on Memphis like a hot, wet blanket. Air conditioners hummed constantly, and the normally busy sidewalks emptied by 10 a.m. as residents retreated into their climate-controlled sanctuaries. But behind drawn curtains and closed doors, tensions were building. Sarah's isolation grew incrementally, like shadows lengthening across her perfect lawn. First, she missed a tennis match, a previously unthinkable occurrence. Then the Wednesday book club began meeting at Caroline Peterson's house instead of hers. She said she was redecorating. Caroline would later tell Detective Torres. But we could see Kevin Anderson's truck parked in her driveway through the front window. The yard work became a neighborhood talking point, though never directly addressed. Kevin would arrive early, often before the dew had dried on the grass. His sessions grew longer, more frequent. The lawn that only needed mowing once a week somehow required attention every other day. I saw him washing her car one morning, Barbara Watson noted in her journal, shirtless, while she watched from the porch. In my day, we had more discretion. Lisa Anderson's concerns grew with each passing week. The scholarship offers that had once crowded their mailbox dwindled to a trickle. Kevin's times in the pool kept slipping, tenths of seconds adding up to missed opportunities. He was making money, Lisa would later tell the grand jury. Her nurse's uniform wrinkled from a double shift. But things weren't adding up. New clothes, an expensive watch, more than yard work should pay. When I asked, he said Mrs. Mitchell was generous with tips. Something in my gut told me there was more to it. The financial pressures in the Anderson household mounted. Lisa had taken out a second mortgage to keep them in Magnolia Heights, banking everything on Kevin's swimming scholarship. Each missed practice, each declined time, was another crack in their carefully planned future. Coach Thompson's concerns became more urgent. It wasn't just his times, he would testify. His focus was gone. He'd space out during team meetings, check his phone constantly. I caught him texting during practice, something the old Kevin would never have done. The whispers started at the country club, spread through tennis matches and garden club meetings. Sarah's behavior became a source of carefully worded concern. Her clothes got younger, tighter. The dinner parties that had once been elegant affairs became louder, lasted later. Looking back, Barbara Watson would later say, "We all saw what was happening. We just didn't want to believe it. Not in our neighborhood, not with our people, but in Magnolia Heights, where appearance was everything and secrets were currency. The truth was about to explode into the open in a way that no amount of social finesse could smooth over." June 8, 2018 marked the beginning of a tragedy that would shatter Magnolia Heights forever. The morning started like any other. Kevin Anderson arrived at 9:30 a.m. to clean the Mitchell pool, a job he'd been doing 3 times a week since James's death. Sarah Mitchell watched from her kitchen window, nursing what she would later admit to Detective Torres was her third mimosa of the morning. It would have been James's birthday. Sarah's voice would crack during questioning. He would have been 46. I found his gift in the back of my closet that morning, a Rolex I'd bought months before. I couldn't stop staring at it. The temperature had already hit 91 degrees, and Kevin had stripped off his shirt as he skimmed leaves from the pool. At 17, his swimmer's physique drew glances from neighborhood girls, but until that morning, Sarah had maintained professional distance. I heard her crying before I saw her, Kevin's statement would read. Not loud crying, that quiet kind that's somehow worse. She was standing there in a white tennis dress, holding a glass of lemonade, and just breaking. The security camera footage would later show Sarah's approach to the pool. 10:47 a.m., her steps unsteady, mascara slightly smeared. She stood watching Kevin work for 3 full minutes before speaking. "I miss him so much," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Everyone expects me to be over it by now. 8 months is enough grieving, they say. Back to tennis, back to book club, back to normal." She laughed bitterly. What's normal about sleeping alone in a bed meant for 2? Kevin, unprepared for such raw emotion, did what he'd been raised to do. He listened. He set down the pool skimmer and faced her fully, offering the kind of attention that lonely people crave. She wasn't Mrs. Mitchell in that moment, he would later tell his lawyer. She was just Sarah, a person drowning in grief while everyone else was swimming in their perfect lives. The touch came naturally, her hand on his bare arm as she spoke, his awkward pat on her shoulder turning into something more lingering. The security footage shows them standing close, too close, for several minutes. "I felt like I could breathe for the first time in months," Sarah's diary would reveal. "He looked at me like I was real, not just James Mitchell's widow putting on a brave face." The kiss, when it came, surprised them both. Neither would later admit to initiating it. But in the privacy of her pool house, surrounded by the scent of chlorine and summer flowers, lines were crossed that could never be uncrossed. I knew it was wrong. Carrying proof of Crawford's previous victims, security caught her meters from the bridal suite. Crawford pressed no charges. He didn't need to. The message was clear. Resistance was futile. The wedding video, later reviewed by investigators, captured telling moments. Crawford's possessive grip during photos. Victoria's flinch when he touched her face. The best man's toast referencing Crawford's appreciation for youth. Most telling was the footage from unused angles. Victoria mouthing, "Help me," to a server. Crawford's whispered threats between poses, security guards blocking all exits. As the reception ended, Victoria stood on the grand staircase for the final photos. Her bouquet landed at Sophie's feet. She had sneaked back in wearing catering staff uniform. It was their last contact before the honeymoon. Inside the flowers, Sophie found a small note, USB in violin. Show Blackwood everything. The newlyweds departed at midnight for the Maldives. Crawford, ever the showman, carried his bride to the waiting limousine. Guests cheered at the romantic gesture. None saw his fingers digging into her ribs or heard his whispered warning, "Remember our agreement." Accidents happen on honeymoons. Victoria Anderson became Victoria Crawford with a signature and a kiss. She entered a prison built of wealth and threats, sealed by vows and violence. Her wedding was a masterclass in manipulation, a $5 million facade hiding a transaction of power and control. But in her final act of defiance, she had planted the seeds of Crawford's destruction, evidence that would outlive her final days in paradise. Azure Dreams Resort welcomed the Crawfords on July 12, 2022. Villa 247, isolated on the resort's northern tip, became both paradise and prison. Security footage shows Victoria stumbling as they entered. Staff noted her dilated pupils, suggesting forced sedation during the flight. The abuse escalated immediately. Resort cameras captured Victoria running through the beach at 3 a.m. their first night. Crawford's security team intercepting her before she reached the main building. Guest services logged noise complaints from neighboring villas. Furniture being moved, the report stated. The next morning, Victoria appeared at breakfast wearing long sleeves despite the tropical heat. Her last successful contact with Sophie came through a borrowed phone from housekeeping. "He found something on my phone. Photos of documents from his office. He's been talking to someone about cleaning up loose ends. I think this is it. Sophie. If I don't." The call disconnected. The housekeeper was relocated to another property that afternoon. July 14th brought the final pieces into place. Crawford held meetings with unknown visitors in his villa. Staff reported deliveries of unusual supplies, industrial cleaning materials, heavy-duty plastic sheeting, diving equipment. Victoria made 4 attempts to use the resort's business center computer. Each time, security arrived within minutes to escort her back. Hotel staff documented increasing concerns. Head chef Marco Rossi reported Victoria's hands shaking too badly to hold her fork at dinner. Spa therapist Amy Chen noted, severe bruising inconsistent with normal activities. Beach attendant Raj Patel observed Crawford's aggressive handling of Victoria during a supposedly romantic sunset walk. The last verified sighting came at 7:43 p.m. on July 15th. Security footage shows Victoria entering the beachfront restaurant alone, a rare moment without Crawford's surveillance. She borrowed waitress Amora Rashid's phone, made a brief call later traced to a burner phone in Sophie's possession. Her final words recorded, "He knows about the files. All of it. The girls, the islands, everything. I hid." The call cut off. Crawford reported her missing 36 hours later. His timeline claimed she went for a midnight swim. Resort logs show different activity. 8:15 p.m., Crawford meets 2 unidentified men at villa. 9:30 p.m., security cameras on North Beach malfunction. 10:45 p.m., unusual boat activity near villa's private dock. 11:50 p.m., power fluctuation in Villa 247. 2:30 a.m., Crawford's security team loads heavy bags into boat. 4:15 a.m., cleaning crew requested for villa. 5 a.m., Crawford makes first of 3 calls to his lawyers. The crime scene, when finally processed, revealed careful cleanup. However, Lisa would later sob to Detective Torres, "A mother knows. God help me. I knew something was wrong. I just never imagined, never thought." By early August, The situation was a powder keg waiting for a spark. Sarah had stopped attending book club entirely. Kevin's scholarship offers sat unopened in the mail. They were lost in their own world, blind to the growing suspicions around them. Barbara Watson's final journal entry before the incident would prove prophetic. Watched Sarah and the Anderson boy by the pool today. There's something dangerous in the way they look at each other. In my 30 years of teaching, I've seen that look before. It never ends well. The fuse was lit. The only question was who would be caught in the explosion. The beginning of the end started with a mother's routine task. On August 2, 2018, Lisa Anderson was doing laundry in her modest Memphis home when she discovered something that would shatter her world. A Cartier receipt tucked into her son's swim team jacket pocket. $7,000, Lisa would later tell Detective Torres. Her nurse's uniform still wrinkled from another double shift. My son, who made $12 in our cleaning pools, had somehow bought a watch worth more than my monthly mortgage payment. The receipt was just the beginning, hidden in Kevin's desk drawer, wrapped in an old swim meet program. Lisa found a burner phone filled with messages that made her heart stop. Hundreds of texts to someone saved simply as S, each one more damning than the last. Barbara Watson, still watching from her window across the street, documented the changes in her meticulous journal. Kevin stopped coming home after practice, she wrote. His car would appear in the evening, parked 2 streets over, thinking no one would notice. But in Magnolia Heights, someone always notices. At Memphis East High School, Kevin Anderson's transformation from star athlete to troubled teen happened with frightening speed. Janet Myers, the school counselor, began keeping a separate file documenting her concerns. He was like a different person, Myers would later testify. The focused, ambitious boy who'd never missed a practice was suddenly sleeping through classes. His GPA dropped from a 4.2 to a 2.8 in less than 2 months. Coach Thompson watched helplessly as his star swimmer's times plummeted. Texas called on August 15th, he recalled during the investigation. They said they were re-evaluating their scholarship offer. In coach speak, that means it's already gone. But it was Sarah Mitchell's behavior that truly set the neighborhood tongues wagging. The elegant widow who once hosted Magnolia Heights' most sophisticated dinner parties now appeared disheveled at morning swim meets, wearing clothes that raised knowing eyebrows among the country club set. She stopped trying to hide it, Barbara Watson noted. The way she looked at that boy, like a drowning person looking at air. The financial entanglement deepened with frightening speed. Bank records would later show Sarah making large cash withdrawals. $3,000 here, $5,000 there. Kevin suddenly sported designer clothes and a new MacBook Pro, items his mother's nursing salary couldn't possibly afford. Richard Harrison, the Mitchell family attorney, noticed the suspicious patterns in Sarah's spending. The trust James left had strict provisions, Harrison would testify. Sarah was burning through money like someone who didn't expect to need it much longer. Everything changed on August 20th. A plain white envelope appeared in Sarah's mailbox, containing poolside photos that left nothing to imagination. The blackmailer demanded $50,000 in exchange for silence. Security footage from that evening shows Sarah running barefoot across her manicured lawn to the pool house, phone in hand. The conversation that followed would later be played in court. A frantic woman realizing her carefully constructed world was crumbling. Lisa Anderson finally confronted her son on August 23rd, after finding a handwritten love letter that confirmed her worst fears. The conversation, as she would later tell Detective Torres through tears, revealed how far gone her son already was. He looked at me with James Mitchell's watch on his wrist and lied to my face, Lisa recalled. My son, who'd never so much as missed curfew, stood there telling me I was imagining things while wearing evidence of his lies on his body. The community's whispers turned to shouts when Sarah missed James's memorial service at First Presbyterian. Instead of honoring her dead husband's memory, security cameras at Memphis International Airport captured her with Kevin in the short-term parking lot. Engaged in what one witness described as an emotional confrontation, anonymous tips began flooding school administration, each one more detailed than the last, building a picture that no one wanted to see but couldn't ignore. By August 25th, the school had no choice but to act. Kevin's suspension from the swim team made the local news, Another crack in the facade of Magnolia Heights' perfect veneer. The second blackmail demand arrived on August 27th, $100,000 this time, with copies of text messages that would destroy them both. Sarah withdrew the money without hesitation, emptying an account James had set aside for charity donations. Detective Torres would later trace the money's path through 5 different drop locations, each one leading closer to the tragedy that was about to unfold. She was desperate, Torres would testify, and desperate people make fatal mistakes. The final night, August 28th, played out like a Greek tragedy. Security footage shows Sarah pacing her kitchen at 11:47 p.m., phone clutched to her ear like a lifeline. Her last conversation with Kevin, captured by the pool house security system, revealed 2 people who had lost all touch with reality. Sarah's plan was simple in its desperation. They would run away together, start fresh somewhere no one knew them. She had money, connections, dreams of a new life. But Kevin's response shattered more than just their fantasy. "I'm 17, he said, his voice barely a whisper on the recording. When Sarah protested that age was just a number, his reply would later echo through the courtroom. "No, it's evidence." The silence that followed lasted exactly 42 seconds. In less than 24 hours, one of them would be dead, and the other's life would be destroyed forever. But in that moment, in the quiet of a Memphis night, 2 people faced the reality of what they'd become, and what it would cost them both. The tension in Magnolia Heights reached its breaking point in the final days of August 2018. As Lisa Anderson's email to the school board circulated through administrative offices, the carefully maintained privacy of Memphis's elite suburb began to crumble. That email changed everything, Principal Margaret Rhodes would later testify. When a parent explicitly accuses a neighbor of exploiting their child, we can't look the other way, no matter who's involved. The police tip line, which had been quiet for months, suddenly lit up with anonymous calls. Detective Torres's log from August 29th reveals the community's growing panic. 10:15 a.m. Caller reports suspicious meetings in Mitchell Pool House. 11:30 a.m. Anonymous tip about expensive gifts to a minor. 2:45 p.m. Local business owner reports concerning behavior behind Methodist Church. 4:20 p.m. School staff member expresses concerns about student welfare. But it was the video that arrived in Sarah's inbox on August 30th that sent everything spiraling toward its tragic conclusion. Security footage from her own pool house, somehow accessed and copied, showing intimate moments that left no room for denial. The blackmailer knew exactly what they were doing, Detective Torres would later explain. They didn't just threaten to expose the relationship. They proved they could destroy both lives with a single mouse click. The demand was simple: $200,000 by midnight, or the video would be sent to every phone in Magnolia Heights. Sarah's response, captured by her home security system: "Never thought." By early August, the situation was a powder keg waiting for a spark. Sarah had stopped attending book club entirely. Kevin's scholarship offers sat unopened in the mail. They were lost in their own world, blind to the growing suspicions around them. Barbara Watson's final journal entry before the incident would prove prophetic. Watched Sarah and the Anderson boy by the pool today. There's something dangerous in the way they look at each other. In my 30 years of teaching, I've seen that look before. It never ends well. The fuse was lit. The only question was who would be caught in the explosion. The beginning of the end started with a mother's routine task. On August 2nd, 2018, Lisa Anderson was doing laundry in her modest Memphis home when she discovered something that would shatter her world: a Cartier receipt tucked into her son's swim team jacket pocket. $7,000, Lisa would later tell Detective Torres, her nurse's uniform still wrinkled from another double shift. "My son, who made $12 in our cleaning pools, had somehow bought a watch worth more than my monthly mortgage payment." The receipt was just the beginning, hidden in Kevin's desk drawer, wrapped in an old swim meet program. Lisa found a burner phone filled with messages that made her heart stop. Hundreds of texts to someone saved simply as S. Each one more showed a woman unraveling. She spent 3 hours pacing her kitchen, making frantic calls to her bank, her lawyer, and finally, fatefully, to Kevin. At Memphis East High School, The whispers had become a roar. Kevin's sudden removal from the swim team sparked speculation that reached far beyond the pool deck. Coach Thompson found himself fielding calls from college recruiters, trying to explain the unexplainable. How do you tell Texas that your star swimmer isn't just slipping? He's drowning in something you can't even discuss. Thompson would later ask the grand jury. Lisa Anderson's worst fears were confirmed when she received an anonymous envelope at the hospital where she worked. Inside were photos of her son leaving expensive restaurants with Sarah, receipts for jewelry, hotel charges from neighboring towns. The final item was a handwritten note. Do you know where your son really is when you're working nights? The confrontation that followed shook the Anderson household to its foundation. Lisa, still in her scrubs from a 12-hour shift, waited up until Kevin came home at 2 a.m. I didn't even recognize him anymore, Lisa would sob during her testimony. When I showed him the photos, he didn't deny it. He just looked at me with these dead eyes and said, "You don't understand our love." By September 1st, the school administration had no choice but to take official action. An emergency meeting was called. Entanglement deepened with frightening speed. Bank records would later show Sarah making large cash withdrawals. $3,000 here, $5,000 there. Kevin suddenly sported designer clothes and a new MacBook Pro, items his mother's nursing salary couldn't possibly afford. Richard Harrison, the Mitchell family attorney, noticed the suspicious patterns in Sarah's spending. The trust James left had strict provisions, Harrison would testify. Sarah was burning through money like someone who didn't expect to need it much longer. Everything changed on August 20th. A plain white envelope appeared in Sarah's mailbox, containing poolside photos that left nothing to imagination. The blackmailer demanded $50,000 in exchange for silence. Security footage from that evening shows Sarah running barefoot across her manicured lawn to the pool house, phone in hand. The conversation that followed would later be played in court, a frantic woman realizing her carefully constructed world was crumbling. Lisa Anderson finally confronted her son on August 23rd, after finding a handwritten love letter that confirmed her worst fears. The conversation, as she would later tell Detective Torres through tears, revealed how far gone her son already was. "He looked at me with James Mitchell's watch on his wrist and lied to my face," Lisa recalled. "My son, who'd never so much as missed curfew, stood there telling me I was imagining things while wearing evidence of his lies on his body." The community's whispers turned to shouts when Sarah missed James's memorial service at First Presbyterian. Instead of honoring her dead husband's memory, security cameras at Memphis International Airport captured her with Kevin in the short-term parking lot. Engaged in what one witness described as an emotional confrontation, anonymous tips began flooding school administration, each one more detailed than the last. In manipulation, building a picture that no one wanted to see but couldn't ignore. By August 25th, the school had no choice but to act. Kevin's suspension from the swim team made the local news, another crack in the facade of Magnolia Heights' perfect veneer. The second blackmail demand arrived on August 27th, $100,000 this time, with copies of text messages that would destroy them both. Sarah withdrew the money without hesitation, emptying an account James had set aside for charity donations. Detective Torres would later trace the money's path through 5 different drop locations, each one leading closer to the tragedy that was about to unfold. She was desperate, Torres would testify, and desperate people make fatal mistakes. The final night, August 28th, played out like a Greek tragedy. Security footage shows Sarah pacing her kitchen at 11:47 p.m., phone clutched to her ear like a lifeline. Her last conversation with Kevin, captured by the pool house security system, revealed 2 people who had lost all touch with reality. Sarah's plan was simple in its desperation. They would run away together, start fresh somewhere no one knew them. She had money, connections, dreams of a new life. But Kevin's response shattered more than just their fantasy. Victoria's story became a blueprint for dismantling systems of privileged exploitation. Perhaps most significantly, Victoria's death changed how society views wealth and vulnerability. Her careful documentation exposed how predators use money to create and maintain systems of abuse. Media coverage shifted from sensationalizing May-December romances to examining power dynamics in relationships with large wealth disparities. The Victoria Project's prevention program now operates in schools nationwide. Students learn to recognize grooming tactics, understand financial manipulation, and identify signs of systematic abuse. The curriculum, initially controversial, has become a model for teaching young people about the intersection of wealth and exploitation. 2 years after Victoria's death, her impact continues to grow. Each new investigation using Victoria's law protocols brings more predators to justice. Every woman helped by the Victoria Project carries forward her legacy. The systemic changes she died to create have fundamentally altered how society handles wealth-enabled crime. In Franklin, Tennessee, a small memorial garden stands where Victoria once practiced violin. The plaque reads simply, Victoria Anderson. She turned her tragedy into triumph, her death into justice, her story into change. Sophie visits often, bringing fresh flowers and new stories of lives saved through her sister's sacrifice. Victoria knew she wouldn't survive, she tells visitors, but she made sure her death would protect others. That's not tragedy, that's heroism. Somehow accessed and copied, showing intimate moments that left no room for denial. The blackmailer knew exactly what they were doing, Detective Torres would later explain. They didn't just threaten to expose the relationship. They proved they could destroy both lives with a single mouse click. The demand was simple, $200,000 by midnight, or the video would be sent to every phone in Magnolia Heights. Sarah's response, captured by her home security system, never thought. By early August, the situation was a powder keg waiting for a spark. Sarah had stopped attending book club entirely. Kevin's scholarship offers sat unopened in the mail. They were lost in their own world, blind to the growing suspicions around them. Barbara Watson's final journal entry before the incident would prove prophetic. Watched Sarah and the Anderson boy by the pool today. There's something dangerous in the way they look at each other. In my 30 years of teaching, I've seen that look before. It never ends well. The fuse was lit. The only question was who would be caught in the explosion. The beginning of the end started with a mother's routine task. On August 2, 2018, Lisa Anderson was doing laundry in her modest Memphis home when she discovered something that would shatter her world. A Cartier receipt tucked into her son's swim team jacket pocket. $7,000, Lisa would later tell Detective Torres. Her nurse's uniform still wrinkled from another double shift. My son, who made $12 in our cleaning pools, had somehow bought a watch worth more than my monthly mortgage payment. The receipt was just the beginning, hidden in Kevin's desk drawer, wrapped in an old swim meet program. Lisa found a burner phone filled with messages that made her heart stop. Hundreds of texts to someone saved simply as S, each one more damning than the last. Barbara showed a woman unraveling. She spent 3 hours pacing her kitchen, making frantic calls to her bank, her lawyer, and finally, fatefully, to Kevin. At Memphis East High School, the whispers had become a roar. Kevin's sudden removal from the swim team sparked speculation that reached far beyond the pool deck. Coach Thompson found himself fielding calls from college recruiters, trying to explain the unexplainable. How do you tell Texas that your star swimmer isn't just slipping? He's drowning in something you can't even discuss. Thompson would later ask the grand jury. Lisa Anderson's worst fears were confirmed when she received an anonymous envelope at the hospital where she worked. Inside were photos of her son leaving expensive restaurants with Sarah, receipts for jewelry, hotel charges from neighboring towns. The final item was a handwritten note. Do you know where your son really is when you're working nights? The confrontation that followed shook the investigation had exposed vulnerabilities in international banking systems, raised questions about cultural integration in expatriate communities, and challenged assumptions about privilege and justice in Dubai's glittering financial district. For the investigators, prosecutors, and defense teams, the case represented a unique confluence of personal tragedy and systemic failure. As they prepared for the trial's final phase, all involved knew that the verdict would have implications far beyond the fate of Sarah Mitchell. The final phase of Sarah Mitchell's trial began on At the heart of this tragedy were three individuals whose lives were deeply intertwined. Elena Vincent, the charismatic art gallery owner with an ideal life, her husband, Oliver Reynolds, the town's cherished pediatrician, and Clara Ashford, Elena's closest friend and confidant, a reserved boutique owner with a complex personality. To the outside world, these three epitomized the very essence of Centerville: industrious, amiable, and profoundly engaged in their community. Yet, underneath the community potlucks and PDA meetings, a perilous undertow was developing. A seemingly harmless scheme, fueled by one woman's insecurities, initiated a sequence of events that spiraled into passion, deception, and eventually tragedy. Elena and Oliver Reynolds' romance became a small-town myth. They encountered each other on a hot summer day in 2005 at Centerville's annual 4th of July celebration. Elena, formerly Elena Caldwell, was overseeing the lemonade stand, her hair shimmering under the sun. Oliver, who had just moved to town to begin his role at the local clinic, was immediately enchanted. Their romance swiftly became a flurry of secretive smiles in crowded spaces, late-night chats on Elena's porch swing, and shared aspirations for a love-filled future. Within 6 months, Oliver proposed, gifting Elena a simple diamond ring at sunset atop the Mill Road Bridge. Their wedding the subsequent spring in the town square became the social highlight of the year. To outsiders, the Reynolds appeared to have everything. Oliver was swiftly adored by both colleagues and patients, his enthusiasm for healthcare infectious, and his kind nature winning over even the most challenging cases. Elena's career soared as her innate charm and sharp business instincts made her the preferred contact for art acquisitions in Centerville. They purchased a picturesque home on Maple Street, complete with a white picket fence and a vast backyard ideal for the family they envisioned. Their house became a central spot for community events, from summer cookouts to festive gathering. To their friends and neighbors, Elena and Oliver were the exemplary couple, the living testament that true love prevailed. However, as time elapsed, fissures started appearing in their perfect exterior. The children they longed for never arrived. Despite numerous medical efforts, the burden of infertility led to subdued disputes and a widening gap between them. Elena immersed herself in her work, spending extra hours at the gallery and handling more clients than ever before. Oliver found comfort in his clinic, dedicating long hours after appointments to research and providing extra care to his young patient. Externally, they maintained a united front, but those close to them could see the tension mounting. As their 5th anniversary neared, Elena was consumed by doubts and insecurities. She began to question whether Oliver's extended hours at the clinic were purely professional or if there was someone else. The seeds of suspicion, once sown, blossomed quickly in her troubled mind. Clara Ashford moved to Centerville in the summer of 2010, stepping in as the boutique owner after the previous owner retired. With her reserved nature, Clara was a contrast to the lively, extroverted local. Initially, she kept to herself, finding comfort in the familiar surroundings of her boutique rather than the town's frequent social event. It was Elena who first extended a hand of friendship, visiting the boutique one afternoon with a basket of local delicacy. Clara's timid smile and sharp wit struck a chord with Elena, and they quickly became close friends. They connected over their love for intricate designs, their irritation with the narrow scope of small-town life, and their hidden aspirations for adventures beyond Centerville. As Elena's marriage with Oliver strained, she increasingly confided in Clara, who became her confidant, always ready to listen and offer comfort. For Clara, who had few close relationships and a challenging upbringing in foster care, Elena's friendship was invaluable. Despite her complex romantic past, which had left her cautious about love, she admired Elena and Oliver's outwardly ideal relationship, even as she became privy to Elena's escalating uncertainty. In the solitude of her cozy apartment above the boutique, Clara occasionally allowed herself to fantasize about a romance as profound as Elena and Oliver's. She quickly dismissed these thoughts, feeling guilty for even considering them. After all, Elena was her best friend, and Oliver was strictly off-limit. Unbeknownst to Clara, her allegiance to Elena would soon be severely tested, a trial that would redefine her understanding of love, friendship, and her own value. As Elena and Oliver's 6th wedding anniversary neared, Elena's fears about Oliver's loyalty intensified. Each late evening of a clinic, every hastily hidden text message, and each distracted conversation fed her suspicions of infidelity. One warm evening in late August, while Elena sat alone on her porch swing sipping white wine and browsing her phone, she stumbled upon an article about loyalty tests. It explained how some hired actors or persuaded friends to flirt with their partners to gauge their faithfulness. This idea resonated with Elena, morphing in her mind until it seemed the only reasonable solution to her doubts. The next day, Elena invited Clara over for coffee. Surrounded by the scent of fresh muffins in the kitchen, Elena cautiously voiced her concerns about Oliver's fidelity. She confided her fears to Clara, shocking her with a startling request. She asked Clara to test Oliver by trying to seduce him. Clara recoiled in surprise, nearly dropping her coffee, and immediately protested, assuring Elena of Oliver's devotion. Nonetheless, Elena persisted, detailing a plan for Clara to flirt with Oliver, maybe even kiss him, arguing it was merely a test of his loyalty that would either confirm her trust or unveil his betrayal. Clara expressed strong reservations, highlighting the ethical dilemmas and possible repercussions. She stressed how this plan could jeopardize Oliver's trust and damage their friendship. Despite her concerns, Elena implored Clara, invoking their deep friendship and her dire need for certainty. After a moment of intense internal debate, Clara reluctantly consented to Elena's request, though she made it clear she thought it was a serious error. The kitchen atmosphere shifted from warm to tense as both women contemplated the consequences of their agreement. As Clara left the Vincent house that day, she was overwhelmed by a sense of dread, feeling she had consented to a plan that might irrevocably alter their lives. Unbeknownst to her, her premonition was about to become reality. The scheme was put into action on a pleasant September evening during the annual Centerville Fall Festival. The town square buzzed with laughter, music, and the inviting smells of funnel cakes and barbecue, all under the romantic illumination of fairy lights strewn above. Clara arrived later than usual, her hair styled in loose waves and her eyes enhanced with subtle makeup. She wore a flowy sundress, a shift from her typically reserved clothing. As she navigated through the crowd, she noticed Oliver at the dunking booth, his t-shirt clinging to his fit frame as he playfully teased the students trying to dunk him. Amid the festival's hustle, Clara gathered her courage and approached Oliver's booth. She greeted him with a flirtatious tone that was uncharacteristic of her, catching him by surprise. Oliver responded courteously but quickly asked about Elena, much to Clara's dismay. Unfazed, Clara continued her act, suggesting they seek some excitement for the evening. Oliver, though polite, appeared slightly puzzled by her behavior. Over the next hour, Clara persisted with her flirtatious efforts, using everything from exaggerated laughter to subtle touches. Each time, Oliver remained polite, but his discomfort grew more apparent. As the evening wore on, Clara unexpectedly found herself enjoying Oliver's company, noticing qualities in him she hadn't before, which deepened her sense of guilt about the charade. In a final audacious move, Clara suggested they meet for coffee alone. Oliver's reaction was swift and clear. He kindly yet firmly declined her suggestion, reminding her of his commitment to his wife. Confused and uneasy, he excused himself and left. Clara was left alone, wrestling with a mix of emotion, relief at Oliver's fidelity, coupled with a surprising hint of disappointment. As she walked home, she couldn't dismiss her thoughts about Oliver, realizing this ordeal had changed her perception of him more than she had expected. In the days after the fall festival, both Oliver and Clara were troubled by unexpected feelings. Oliver, confused and disturbed by Clara's actions, began to see her differently. He noticed things he had previously overlooked: the way her eyes twinkled when she laughed, her graceful movements, her extensive knowledge on various topics. Clara, meanwhile, was consumed with guilt for her deceit. She knew she ought to inform Elena of Oliver's loyalty, yet something restrained her. Each time she recalled that night, she remembered not just her awkward flirting, but also the real connection she had felt with Oliver. Their paths crossed often in the small town, each meeting laden with renewed tension. At the grocery store, their hands brushed while reaching for the same apple, sending a shock of electricity through both. During a town hall meeting, their gazes locked across the room, lingering a moment too long before both averted their eyes, flustered. Oliver immersed himself deeper in his medical work, spending more time at the clinic than ever. Clara engrossed herself in managing her boutique, rearranging her entire stock to stay occupied. Yet, the more they tried to distance themselves, the more frequently their paths intertwined. On a rainy Tuesday afternoon, an unexpected encounter at the boutique changed everything. As Clara was organizing stock, Oliver came by to pick up a special order. Their hands met unexpectedly as they exchanged the packet, charging the air with tension and unspoken sentiment. Overcome with emotion, Oliver confessed his continual thoughts of Clara. Despite her initial protest, Clara found herself irresistibly drawn to him. For a brief moment, they teetered on the brink of a life-changing decision. Then, as if driven by an unstoppable force, they gave in to their desires and shared a passionate kiss. The realization of their actions struck them instantly, compelling them to separate. Clara voiced her shock and dismay, while Oliver, though torn, confessed his deeper feeling. In that silent moment among the boutique's displays, they had crossed a line that would forever change their lives and relationships. The gravity of their actions and its implications for their futures loomed large, signaling the start of a complex and perilous journey. In the weeks that followed, Oliver and Clara's affair deepened in the secrecy of Centerville. They met clandestinely, seizing moments together whenever possible. The storage room of Clara's boutique turned into their haven, a place where they could be their true selves, shielded from the town's scrutiny and their own remorse. Their meetings were an intoxicating blend of passion and intellectual engagement. They spent hours discussing art, debating societal norms, and sharing their aspirations and dreams. Oliver discovered in Clara a soulmate, a person who not only challenged him intellectually but also shared his depth of passion. Clara, for her part, saw in Oliver a complexity and sensitivity that drew her ever closer with each encounter. Yet, their happiness was forever shadowed by the bitter sting of betrayal. Each clandestine kiss and covert touch served as reminders of a trust they were compromising. Elena's oblivious smile haunted them, her image a constant in their mind. As the seasons shifted, Oliver and Clara found themselves entangled deeper in their affair. Despite their repeated resolutions to end it, their emotions intensified,
making the concealment of their affair increasingly arduous. They started to picture a life together, transitioning from tentative ideas to solid plan. On a snowy evening, seeking solace in each other's presence, Oliver proposed they leave town and begin afresh elsewhere, escaping their history. The thought excited Clara, but she could not overlook the impact it would have on Elena. Oliver recognized the distress his choices would inflict but felt driven to be truthful about his feelings for Clara. For the first time, they openly professed their love, a declaration that cemented their resolve to forge a future together. This resolution spurred them into action as they started planning their escape from Centerville, exploring new cities and employment opportunities, envisioning a life where they could be openly united. However, the potential pain they would inflict, especially on Elena, cast a shadow over their hopes, infusing their excitement with a melancholy undertone. Unbeknownst to them, their meticulously laid plans were on the verge of collapse as the web of deceit and betrayal they had spun began to come undone. As Oliver and Clara's relationship deepened, Elena increasingly felt isolated. The loyalty test she had devised had spectacularly misfired. Although she was oblivious to the full scope of the betrayal, she couldn't dismiss the nagging sense that something was profoundly amiss. Oliver's behavior had subtly but noticeably changed. He was distant, frequently lost in thought, and his late hours at the clinic were more common than ever. At home, he seemed distracted. His answers to Elena's questions were vague and non-committal. Clara, too, had become elusive. Their regular meetups at the boutique were often cancelled last minute, and when they did occur, Clara appeared nervous and distracted. She avoided eye contact and swiftly changed the topic whenever Elena mentioned Oliver. Initially, Elena tried to brush aside her worries, convincing herself she was being paranoid and that her insecurities were clouding her judgment. But as the weeks progressed, the signs became too conspicuous to overlook. One evening while sorting laundry, Elena found a long strand of hair on Oliver's shirt, a hair that was clearly not hers. On another occasion, she overheard him speaking in hushed tones on the phone, quickly ending the call as she walked into the room. The breaking point came when Elena decided to surprise Oliver at the clinic with lunch. He was nowhere to be found, not in his office or any of the consultation room. A passing nurse mentioned she had seen Dr. Reynolds heading towards the back rooms. With her heart racing, Elena made her way there. Through the door's window, she saw Oliver and Clara in close conversation, their heads bent together intimately. As she watched, Oliver reached out and tenderly tucked a strand of hair behind Clara's ear, his hand lingering on her face. In that moment, Elena's world came crashing down. The reality she had been unwilling to face engulfed her like a tidal wave. Her husband and her best friend were in an affair, and it was all initiated by her own misguided test. Holding back tears, Elena hurried away from the clinic,
her mind overwhelmed by what she had just seen. The tension escalated one evening as Elena awaited Oliver's return. When he came back, she confronted him about his affair with Clara, having seen them together herself. Caught off guard, Oliver tried to explain but was interrupted. Their intense exchange was abruptly halted by Clara's unexpected arrival. She had come to confess, not knowing Elena had already discovered the truth. Quickly, the situation escalated as Elena, overwhelmed with anger and betrayal, lunged at Clara. Oliver intervened, attempting to defuse the tension. In the chaos, Elena disclosed her own deceit, the loyalty test she had instigated using Clara. This revelation stunned both Oliver and Clara, layering further betrayal onto an already intricate situation. As the full scope of their mutual deceits came to light, the atmosphere charged with anger, guilt, and pain. Elena, realizing Oliver and Clara planned to leave together, reacted with despair, hurling a vase against the wall. The scene ended with the three of them amidst the emotional and physical ruins, each wrestling with the consequences of their actions and the uncertainty of what lay ahead. The idyllic lives they believed they had were irretrievably broken, leaving them to confront the fallout of their decision. The confrontation escalated as Elena, now with a disturbing calm, questioned Oliver and Clara about their intentions to depart together. Oliver tried to explain, but his attempts only inflamed Elena's rage. Clara, burdened by guilt, attempted an apology but inadvertently placed blame on Elena's initial scheme. This provoked a fierce reaction from Elena, who lunged at Clara. Oliver stepped in, restraining Elena, but she managed to scratch his face in her struggle to break free. Seizing the moment of distraction, Elena pushed past Oliver, advancing toward Clara. Retreating from Elena's advance, tripped over the rug. As she fell, she instinctively reached out, grasping Elena for support. The momentum of Clara's fall, combined with Elena's forward movement, propelled them both into the heavy oak bookcase lining one wall of the living room. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Then, with a dreadful creak, the bookcase began to tilt. Oliver, realizing what was about to occur, lunged forward with a shout of warning, but it was too late. The bookcase toppled, its substantial weight crashing down on the two women. The sound of splintering wood and breaking glass filled the room, followed by a terrible, echoing silence. Oliver stood paralyzed with horror, staring at the heap of debris where Elena and Clara had stood just moments before. Then, driven by urgency, he began frantically moving books and broken shelves aside. As he worked, he noticed a warm, sticky substance on his hand. In the dim light, he slowly recognized what it was: blood. So much blood. A faint groan from beneath the rubble spurred Oliver to intensify his rescue effort. Someone was still alive. As he delved deeper, a dreadful realization hit him. Only one of them had survived the collapse. The hours following the tragic incident blurred for Oliver. His normally precise and methodical mind was overwhelmed, driven now by sheer instinct and adrenaline. As he uncovered the bodies, he was met with a horrific scene that would haunt him forever. Elena lay still, her eyes open and vacant, a deep cut across her forehead from striking a shelf corner. Beside her, Clara stirred weakly, her hair clotted with blood. Confronted with the grim outcome of their choices, Oliver made a decision that would change their lives irreversibly. Unable to face the loss of both, he checked Elena for any sign of life, though he knew it was in vain. She was gone. In the ensuing hours, engulfed by shock and desperation, Oliver enacted a plan that contradicted all his ethical principles. He meticulously cleaned the scene, concealing broken items and rearranging furniture to obscure any signs of the altercation. Then, under the veil of night, he carried Elena's body to his car. The drive to Willow Creek became the longest of Oliver's life, every shadow seeming to conceal a witness, every noise sounding like the echo of siren. Upon reaching the old Mill Road Bridge, he paused only briefly before releasing his wife's body into the murky depths below. Returning home, he discovered Clara barely conscious on the sofa where he had left her. Together, they fabricated a story. Elena had left abruptly after a heated argument, taking some belongings with her. They surmised she needed time to calm down. They planned to report her missing the next morning if she hadn't returned. As dawn lit up Centerville, Detective Elias Reeves received the call about a missing person. Little did he know, this routine inquiry would draw him into one of the most intricate and unsettling investigations of his career. In the weeks that followed, as search teams scoured the area and posters featuring Elena's smiling face dotted the town, Oliver and Clara clung to their fabricated narrative and each other. However, as the investigation deepened and discrepancies in their story began to surface, they realized that the truth they had desperately tried to hide was emerging. Detective Elias Reeves, known for his sharp insight into human behavior, felt something amiss from his first interview with Oliver Reynolds and Clara Ashford. The probe into Elena Vincent's disappearance was thorough. Reeves and his squad examined cell phone records, interviewed acquaintances, and carefully pieced together the timeline of that tragic evening. Initially, Oliver and Clara's account seemed plausible. Multiple witnesses confirmed seeing Elena distressed prior to her disappearance. Her car was indeed missing from the Reynolds driveway. But as time passed, inconsistencies in their stories started to show. The turning point occurred when a young fisherman at the Mill Road Bridge caught something heavy. To his dismay, he retrieved a waterlogged purse containing Elena's driver's license. This discovery redirected the investigation, prompting dive teams to search Willow Creek. As the investigation tightened around them, Oliver and Clara's facade began to crumble. Overwhelmed by guilt and sleep deprivation, Clara became progressively unstable. During her third interview with Detective Reeves, she broke down, admitting to the affair but maintaining that Elena's death was unintentional. Confronted with Clara's partial confession, Oliver's resolve weakened, and under intense questioning, he disclosed the entire grim sequence, from Elena's misguided loyalty test to the catastrophic accident and his frantic efforts to obscure it. The conclusive evidence surfaced when Elena's body was discovered in Willow Creek. An autopsy verified that her death was due to blunt force trauma, consistent with the bookcase incident. Ultimately, both Oliver and Clara were convicted of involuntary manslaughter and conspiring to conceal a death. The judge, recognizing the accidental nature of Elena's demise but reproaching their actions post-incident, sentenced them each to 15 years in prison. As the gavel struck, a sigh of relief rippled through Centerville. The ordeal had profoundly disturbed the community, dispelling the facade of a tranquil small town and leaving behind a populace forever altered. Rachel Martinez couldn't pinpoint the exact moment her perfect life began to unravel, but she could trace the threads of her story back to where they first intertwined with Miguel's, that fateful property showing in the summer of 2015. Standing in her home office in the Horizon Tower, surrounded by the evidence of her husband's betrayal, she found herself replaying those early memories with newfound clarity. Born to academic parents in Santa Monica in 1990, Rachel had grown up with an almost obsessive attention to detail, a trait inherited from her mathematician father that would later prove both a blessing and a curse. Her childhood home had been a haven of logical thinking and emotional intelligence, with her mother's psychology practice providing a constant backdrop of human behavioral analysis. These influences shaped her into someone who could read both spreadsheets and people with equal precision. Her path to real estate hadn't been direct. After graduating from UCLA with honors in business administration, she had dabbled in investment banking, but found the work unfulfilling. It was during her first serious relationship, a 2-year engagement that ended with her fiancé's infidelity, that she discovered her talent for property. The process of finding her own place after the breakup had been therapeutic, and her analytical mind found satisfaction in the complex dynamics of real estate transactions. By 2015, at age 25, Rachel had established herself as one of Los Angeles' rising stars in luxury real estate. She had also built careful walls around her heart, the betrayal of her past relationship leaving her with a deep-seated fear of abandonment and a carefully maintained set of defenses. Then Miguel Martinez walked into her life, and those defenses crumbled like sand castles in the tide. The property showing was for a $12 million beachfront estate in Malibu. Miguel arrived 15 minutes early, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit that spoke of success without trying too hard. His smile lit up the marble foyer as he introduced himself, and Rachel felt an immediate spark of connection that both thrilled and terrified her. "I apologize for my early arrival," he had said, his slight accent adding charm to his words. "I find that punctuality is a poor substitute for eagerness." The line should have been cheesy, but delivered with his warm brown eyes fixed on hers, it felt like poetry. What followed was the stuff of local legend in their social circle. Their 3-hour property tour turned into dinner, which became a weekend of intense conversation and undeniable chemistry. Miguel pursued Rachel with a single-minded focus that swept away her reservations. Every detail was perfect: flowers delivered to her office, surprise lunch dates, handwritten notes left on her car. He seemed to anticipate her every need, creating a courtship that felt like a fairy tale. Looking back, Rachel could now see how Miguel had perfectly crafted his approach. He had studied her, understanding that her analytical mind needed logical progression while her wounded heart craved romantic gestures. He built their relationship like one of his construction projects, with careful planning and flawless execution. Miguel's own story, as he told it then, seemed equally perfect. Born in Mexico City in 1988, he had come to the United States at age 10 when his father's construction business expanded northward. He had worked his way up from job sites to project management, eventually starting his own company. His success was self-made, his ambitions seemingly matched only by his devotion to Rachel. What Rachel didn't know then, what she would only discover years later through painstaking investigation, was that Miguel's charm had left a trail of broken hearts across Los Angeles' professional landscape. His construction company had provided the perfect cover for a pattern of seduction and manipulation that spanned years. Female clients, architects, and project managers had all fallen victim to his carefully orchestrated romances. Their whirlwind courtship culminated in a proposal after just 6 months. Miguel arranged a private sunset dinner on the rooftop of what would become their home, the exclusive Horizon Tower. He had supposedly just completed the building's construction, though Rachel would later learn this too was part of his elaborate web of deception. The proposal was witnessed by a random photographer who happened to capture the moment perfectly, and their engagement appeared in several local magazines. Rachel threw herself into their relationship with the same intensity she brought to her career. She scaled back her working hours, turned down opportunities for expansion, and focused on creating their perfect home. Her friends warned her she was moving too fast, but she dismissed their concerns. After all, she was the one who understood numbers, patterns, and probability. She had built a life centered around her children, working hard to create a stable, loving home in their quiet Minnesota community. Those who knew Victoria best said she approached motherhood with the same enthusiasm she brought to everything in life. Her boys were her world, and she had carefully chosen the Riverside Apartments complex for its safe neighborhood and proximity to their school. Every morning, she would wait early to make their breakfast, never missing a school event or sports game. The thought that she would miss her birthday breakfast with them was unthinkable to those who knew her dedication as a mother. Victoria always saw the good in everyone, her sister would later write in a heartbreaking social media post. That's who she was, someone who believed in giving people a chance, in the basic goodness of others. This trusting nature, a quality that made her so beloved in her community, would ultimately be exploited by the man who took her life. The day before her murder, Victoria had been excitedly planning her 39th birthday celebration with her sons. She had promised them a special breakfast the next morning, followed by a day at their favorite park. Her last text to her best friend read,
Can't wait for tomorrow, another year older, but grateful for every moment with my boys. Those words would later be read at her memorial service, a testament to the devoted mother whose life was cut tragically short. Victoria's apartment reflected her personality, warm, welcoming, and filled with photos of her children. On her refrigerator, investigators found a calendar marked with her son's activities, upcoming school events, and her own birthday circled in bright red marker. The morning she was killed, she had planned to open birthday cards her boys had carefully hidden in the kitchen cabinet the night before. What made the tragedy even more heartbreaking was how hard Victoria had worked to create a safe, stable life. She was known for being cautious, especially when it came to her children's safety. Her decision to trust Christopher Neal that night seemed out of character to those who knew her best, but friends later recalled how he had cleverly used their shared hometown connection to lower her guard. She probably felt safe because he knew all the same places, all the same people. One friend noted. He used that familiarity to make her feel comfortable. The investigation would reveal that Victoria had spent that final evening at a bar she knew well, surrounded by familiar faces. She wasn't the type to go home with strangers, but Neal had spent hours gaining her confidence, playing on their shared background and appearing harmless. Security footage showed him acting charming and friendly, giving no indication of the violence that would follow. August 11, 2024, started as a typical summer evening in Sauk Rapids. Victoria had decided to stop by Murphy's Bar, a local establishment she frequently visited with friends, for a quiet drink before her birthday. The security footage from that night would later become crucial evidence, capturing every moment of her fateful encounter with Christopher Neal. At 11:47 p.m., cameras showed Victoria entering the bar wearing a blue summer dress, her favorite silver necklace catching the light. She chose a seat at the corner of the bar, ordering what would be her first and only drink of the night. It was around midnight when Christopher Neal first approached her. The security footage showed him deliberately choosing the seat next to her, despite several empty spaces at the bar. What initially seemed like a chance encounter would later reveal itself as something more calculated. Neal, as captured on the bar's cameras, spent the next hour engaging Victoria in conversation. He mentioned knowing her hometown, dropping names of places and people she knew. With each shared connection, Victoria's natural wariness seemed to fade. The footage showed her becoming more animated, laughing at his stories, her guard lowering with each passing minute. He seemed so normal, so familiar. The bartender would later tell investigators. They looked like old friends catching up, but Neal was far from the harmless figure he portrayed. Just 9 days earlier, he had been released on bail for a violent strangulation attack, a fact Victoria had no way of knowing as she sat beside him. At 1 a.m., the cameras captured what would be Victoria's final moments in public. Neal had offered to drive her home, citing concerns about her safety. The bitter irony of this gesture wouldn't be lost on investigators. Victoria was seen gathering her purse, her car keys glinting in her hand as she led the way to her black Chevy Equinox. The drive to Riverside Apartments took only 5 minutes. Security cameras in the parking lot recorded their arrival at 1:05 a.m. Victoria appeared relaxed, laughing at something Neal said as they walked toward the building's entrance. She used her key fob to let them in, the door closing behind them at 1:07 a.m. It would be the last time Victoria was seen alive. What transpired in the next 2 hours would only be pieced together through forensic evidence and the signs of struggle left behind. The layout of Victoria's apartment suggested she had initially invited Neal in willingly, perhaps for coffee or conversation.
2 cups were found on the kitchen counter, one with traces of lipstick matching Victoria's shade, the other untouched. The violence appeared to have erupted suddenly. Evidence indicated that Victoria had fought desperately for her life. Her broken nails, the overturned furniture, and the scattered contents of her purse painted a picture of a terrifying struggle. The medical examiner would later determine that the attack lasted several minutes, with Victoria conscious and fighting throughout most of it. At precisely 3 a.m., security cameras captured Neal leaving the building alone. His earlier friendly demeanor was gone, replaced by furtive glances and attempts to hide his face. He carried Victoria's car keys, which investigators noted had been in her purse, not on the counter as he would later claim. The footage showed him getting into Victoria's Equinox and driving away, leaving her lying lifeless in the apartment where she had built a home for her children. The investigation into Victoria's murder shifted shifted into high gear once detectives realized they weren't just dealing with a random act of violence, but potentially the work of a serial offender. The crime scene at Riverside Apartments became a focal point of forensic activity, with investigators meticulously documenting every detail of the tragic final moments of Victoria's life. The medical examiner's findings painted a horrific picture of Victoria's final struggle. The bruising patterns on her neck told a story that contradicted Neil's claims of innocence. These weren't the marks of a brief encounter, noted the lead forensic investigator. The injuries showed sustained pressure, applied with practiced precision. Most disturbing was the similarity to the injuries reported in Neil's previous assault case, a pattern that suggested not just violence, but a signature method of attack. DNA evidence would prove crucial to the investigation. Swabs taken from Victoria's neck revealed genetic material from two sources. Neil's DNA emerged as the dominant profile, particularly concentrated in areas showing the worst bruising. A second, weaker DNA profile was also detected, but investigators quickly determined this likely came from casual contact earlier in the day, perhaps from one of her children or a friend. Victoria's apartment, typically kept immaculate for her children, had become a map of her final fight for life. A broken lamp in the living room suggested where the attack began. Scattered cushions and an overturned coffee table traced her desperate attempt to escape. Most telling was her bedroom, where investigators found her phone still plugged into its charger. She never had a chance to call for help. The evidence trail extended beyond the apartment. Security footage from neighboring buildings captured Neil's exit from the complex in Victoria's car. Traffic cameras tracked the black Chevy Equinox heading south on Highway 10, then merging onto Interstate 35. Each ping from Victoria's stolen cell phone helped investigators track Neil's flight to Louisiana, where he apparently believed he could evade detection. When authorities finally caught up with Neil at a motel just outside New Orleans, they found more damning evidence. Victoria's car keys were in his pocket, her credit cards in his wallet. Her phone had been wiped clean and abandoned in a dumpster 3 states away. These weren't the actions of someone who, as Neil claimed, had left a woman alive and well in her apartment. Most incriminating was Neil's behavior during questioning. His claim of limited memory about the events in Victoria's apartment stood in stark contrast to his precise recall of their earlier conversation at the bar. He remembered details about their shared hometown but claimed to forget her name. When shown photos of Victoria's apartment, he recognized where he had been but insisted he couldn't remember what had happened there. The autopsy results delivered the final pieces of evidence needed to build a solid case. Victoria had died between 2:30 and 3 a.m., exactly the time frame when Neil was still in her apartment. The cause of death was manual strangulation, with defensive wounds on her hands and arms showing she had fought desperately until her last breath. Most chillingly, the method of strangulation matched exactly the technique described by Neil's previous victim, a woman who had survived to tell her story just 9 days earlier. Christopher Neil's path to becoming Victoria's alleged killer didn't begin the night they met at Murphy's bar. As investigators dug deeper into his past, they uncovered a disturbing pattern of escalating violence that painted a picture of a predator growing increasingly bold and dangerous with each passing year. Just 9 days before Victoria's murder, on August 1, 2024, Neil had faced charges for a strikingly similar attack. In that case, he had allegedly strangled a woman he was dating in Kin County. The victim survived to tell a haunting story that would later mirror Victoria's final moments. He seemed so normal at first, she had told police. Then something changed in his eyes, and his hands were around my throat. Despite the severity of this attack, Neil was released on bail on August 3rd, given a no-contact order, and walked free. But this wasn't just about 2 isolated incidents. As investigators pieced together Neil's history, they found a trail of police reports, restraining orders, and domestic disturbance calls stretching back years. Women in different counties had reported similar encounters, charm turning to violence, with strangulation being his weapon of choice. Most cases had been handled as routine domestic disputes, the pattern going unnoticed until it was too late. The evolution of Neil's violence was particularly chilling. He had started with domestic incidents, attacking women who knew him. Victoria represented a deadly escalation, the first time he had allegedly targeted a stranger. The shift from domestic violence to attacking someone he had just met showed a predator growing more confident, more brazen in his choices of victims. His method of approaching victims revealed careful calculation. With Victoria, he had used their shared hometown connection to gain trust. Security footage from Murphy's bar showed him watching her for nearly an hour before making his move, waiting until she was alone before approaching. This wasn't opportunistic violence. It was practiced, planned predation. Even more disturbing was Neil's behavior after each attack. In previous cases, he had shown a pattern of minimizing his actions, claiming memory loss, or insisting the women had exaggerated their injuries. With Victoria's case, he followed the same playbook, admitting to being in her apartment but claiming no memory of the violence, despite the clear evidence of his deliberate actions afterward. The violation of his no-contact order from the August 1st case revealed another aspect of Neil's personality, a complete disregard for legal restrictions. On the very day Victoria's body was discovered, August 12th, the Akin County Sheriff's Office was already processing paperwork for his violation of the order. He had allegedly attempted to contact his previous victim, showing a pattern of continued harassment that would only end with his arrest for Victoria's murder. What made Neil particularly dangerous was his ability to appear harmless. Bar patrons who saw him with Victoria described him as charming, well-spoken, and completely normal. This facade of normality allowed him to move through society virtually undetected, making him the kind of predator that law enforcement finds most challenging to stop before tragedy strikes. The manhunt for Christopher Neil ended at the Red Pine Motel, a rundown establishment just outside New Orleans, Louisiana. After nearly a week of tracking cell phone signals and following Victoria's stolen credit card transactions, authorities finally closed in on August 18, 2024. They found Victoria's black Chevy Equinox parked outside room 114, its Minnesota plates covered with mud in an apparent attempt to avoid detection. The arrest itself was anticlimactic. Neil surrendered without resistance when federal marshals and local police breached his room at 6:15 a.m. He was found fully dressed, lying on top of the bed covers, as if he had been expecting them. In his possession were Victoria's car keys, credit cards, and apartment key fob, items he had taken from her purse after allegedly taking her life. What struck investigators was Neil's demeanor during arrest. He showed no emotion, no signs of distress or surprise. When informed he was being charged with Victoria's murder, he reportedly just nodded and said, "I want a lawyer." This cold composure contrasted sharply with the violent struggle evidenced in Victoria's apartment just days before. The charges against Neil began to stack up quickly. In Benton County, where Victoria's murder occurred, prosecutors filed second-degree murder charges. The criminal complaint detailed the brutality of the attack, citing the medical examiner's findings of severe neck trauma and defensive wounds. The DNA evidence, security footage, and Neil's flight to Louisiana were listed as key elements supporting the murder charge. But Neil's legal troubles extended beyond Victoria's case. In Akin County, he still faced charges for the August 1st strangulation attack. The violation of his no-contact order from that case added another charge. Prosecutors in both counties began coordinating their efforts, building a case that would show Neil's pattern of escalating violence. During his first court appearance in Benton County, Neil maintained his story of limited memory about the night of Victoria's death. Through his court-appointed attorney, he entered a not guilty plea. The prosecution, however, painted a different picture. They described a calculated predator who had watched Victoria at the bar, gained her trust through manipulation, and then killed her in her own home. The bail hearing revealed the full extent of the prosecution's concerns about Neil's danger to society. They presented evidence of his previous strangulation attack, the violated no-contact order, and his attempt to flee the state. The judge, noting the escalating pattern of violence and flight risk, ordered Neil held without bail, a decision that brought visible relief to Victoria's family in the courtroom. As Neil was led away in shackles, attention turned to the broader implications of his case. Questions arose about how he had been free to allegedly kill Victoria despite the recent strangulation charge. The prosecutor's office faced scrutiny over their handling of his previous case, where he had been released on bail despite showing clear signs of being a danger to women. In the quiet Minnesota town of Sauk Rapids, the impact of Victoria's murder rippled through the community like shockwaves. Her two young boys, who had waited eagerly for their mother to join them for birthday breakfast that August morning, now faced a future without her guidance, love, and ever-present smile. Their lives, once filled with the routine of school days and their mother's constant presence, had been shattered by one night of senseless violence. Victoria's family launched a GoFundMe page, not just to cover funeral expenses, but to create a trust fund for her son's future. The page became a testament to who Victoria was, filled with stories from those who knew her. She was more than just a victim, wrote her sister. Victoria was the kind of person who would give you her last dollar if you needed it. She taught her boys to be kind, to be strong, and to always help others. Now we have to help them carry on without her. The local community's response was overwhelming. Murphy's Bar, where Victoria spent her final hours, hosted a fundraiser for her children. Regular patrons shared stories of her infectious laugh, her proud conversations about her boys' achievements, and her bubbly personality that could brighten even the darkest days. She wasn't just another customer, the bartender recalled. Victoria was family to everyone who knew her, but beneath the outpouring of support ran an undercurrent of anger and frustration. Victoria's death had exposed critical failures in a system designed to protect vulnerable individuals. Her family spoke out publicly about these systemic gaps. 9 days, her brother said during a community meeting. Just 9 days between Neil's release and Victoria's death. The system had him in custody, knew he was dangerous, and still let him walk free. The impact of Victoria's death extended beyond her immediate circle. Local domestic violence organizations reported an increase in calls for help, with many women citing her story as their wake-up call. The Sauk Rapids Police Department began reviewing its protocols for handling strangulation cases, acknowledging that these incidents often precede more serious violence. In a cruel twist of fate, Victoria's birthday, August 12, now marks both her death and her legacy. Her family has established the Victoria Gamble Foundation, dedicated to raising awareness about domestic violence and advocating for stricter bail conditions in strangulation cases. "We couldn't save Victoria," her mother said at the foundation's launch, "but maybe we can save someone else's daughter, someone else's mother." As Christopher Neal awaits trial in Benton County, Victoria's story continues to resonate. Her death has become a catalyst for change, prompting discussions about how the justice system handles violent offenders and the need for better protection for potential victims. But for those who loved her, Victoria was more than a cautionary tale or a statistic. She was a mother who lived for her children, a friend who never failed to lift others up, and a woman whose trust in others ultimately cost her everything. Today, Victoria's apartment at Riverside remains empty, a silent reminder of the tragedy that unfolded there. Her black Chevy Equinox, recovered from Louisiana, sits in an evidence lot. But her spirit lives on through her sons, through the foundation bearing her name, and through the changes her death has inspired in her community. While it's too late for Victoria, her story serves as both a warning and a call to action, a reminder that patterns of violence, left unchecked, can escalate with devastating consequences. In the sweltering heat of a Texas summer in 2013, Officer David Parker, a 35-year-old cop in Austin, found himself trapped in a marriage that had long since lost its spark. His relationship with Emily, his wife of 10 years, had devolved into distant exchanges and cold, mechanical routines. Emily, a dedicated social worker, worked long hours, and the strain of her demanding schedule, combined with David's night shifts as a police officer, only widened the emotional gap between them. Though they lived under the same roof, it often felt as if they inhabited entirely different worlds, their conversations reduced to brief, impersonal discussions about daily tasks. David had never imagined himself as someone who would stray outside his marriage, but with each passing day, the loneliness he felt became harder to ignore. The opportunity for an affair came unexpectedly one blistering afternoon when David pulled over a black SUV for a routine traffic stop. Behind the wheel was Sarah Mitchell, a 32-year-old woman who, by appearance, seemed well off. Sarah was married to James Mitchell, a successful businessman in the oil industry. As David approached the vehicle, he noticed that Sarah's demeanor was subdued, almost melancholic. Their initial exchange was purely procedural, but something about the interaction felt different to David. There was an immediate, unspoken connection between them, one that neither needed to put into words. Like David, Sarah was deeply unhappy in her marriage. Her husband, James, though financially successful, was emotionally distant. He spent more time at work than at home, leaving Sarah to feel increasingly isolated in a life of luxury that no longer brought her any joy. The brief interaction with David during that traffic stop felt like a breath of fresh air for her. As they spoke, the flirtation between them became more noticeable. What should have been a quick, routine stop turned into a conversation that lasted far longer than it should have. David issued her a warning for a minor infraction, but as Sarah drove away, the memory of their exchange lingered in his mind, stirring emotions he hadn't acknowledged in years. Days later, David found himself thinking about Sarah more than he should. He knew the risks involved in pursuing anything beyond that initial interaction. Austin was a large city, but news still spread fast, especially in his professional circles. As a police officer, David knew his standing in the community would be irreparably damaged if word got out that he was involved in an affair. Sarah, too, was drawn to the possibility of something more. She was tired of being the neglected wife of a man more in love with his career than with her. The encounter with David had stirred emotions she had long buried, and the idea of an affair excited her in a way that both terrified and thrilled her. It didn't take long for their paths to cross again. Within a week of their initial meeting, David and Sarah found themselves together, this time deliberately. Their flirtatious conversations quickly turned into something much more physical, and they began meeting in secluded places far from prying eyes. As a police officer in a city where people trusted him to uphold the law, being involved with a married woman, especially when he was also married, was a scandal waiting to happen. The moral weight of his actions gnawed at him, but the pull he felt toward Sarah was too strong to resist. Every time he thought about ending the affair, he found himself unable to let go, wanting more. Sarah, on the other hand, seemed less worried about the consequences. She had long since accepted that her marriage to James was over in all but name. She no longer cared about maintaining appearances, and the idea of running away with David was starting to take hold in her mind. She fantasized about a life where they could be together without secrecy, where she wasn't trapped in a loveless marriage to a man who barely noticed her. The tension between David's desire to keep things hidden and Sarah's growing need for something real began to create cracks in their relationship. David knew that sooner or later, they would have to make a choice. Either end the affair before it destroyed their lives or accept the inevitable consequences of being together. As the months passed and Sarah's pregnancy progressed, her determination to build a future with David only grew stronger. She was eager to escape the shadows and secrecy of their affair, believing the pregnancy was the turning point. For her, it was a sign that it was time for David to leave Emily and fully commit to their new reality. She frequently talked about their plans, the baby's future, and the life they could create together as a family. But David's enthusiasm for the relationship had long since diminished. While David wrestled with his inner turmoil, James, Sarah's ex-husband, had not moved on. He still loved Sarah deeply and was devastated by her decision to leave him. Unable to comprehend why their marriage had collapsed so suddenly, James spent months trying to win her back, but Sarah remained distant, unwilling to reveal the true reason behind their separation. James's desperation turned into suspicion as he started to believe Sarah was hiding something from him. His obsession with uncovering her relationship with David consumed him. He began driving past her house late at night, watching her movements and trying to catch a glimpse of David visiting her. With each passing day, James's fixation grew more dangerous, driven by anger and the desire for revenge. The confrontation between David and James finally came to a head. James accused David of ruining his life, wrecking his marriage, and now trying to take his unborn child. Feeling trapped and increasingly paranoid, David attempted to walk away, but James refused to let him go. The argument quickly escalated when James shoved David, and in a moment of uncontrolled rage, David retaliated. The two men fought violently, both consumed by their emotions. In a moment of sheer panic and fury, David's hands found their way to James's throat. When David finally let go, James collapsed to the ground, lifeless. The horror of what he had done struck David immediately. He knelt down, attempting to revive James, but it was too late. His hands trembled and his mind raced. He had crossed a line from which there was no return. Within minutes, his life had spiraled out of control. What had started as an affair had now escalated into murder, and the realization sent David into a state of shock. For a few moments, he stood frozen, staring at James's lifeless body, unable to comprehend the magnitude of what he had just done. He thought of the possible consequences. If anyone found out, his life would be over. Not just his career, but everything, his freedom, his future. The scandal would ruin him, and there was no way to come back from this. His only thought was to hide what had happened, to cover up the crime as best he could. Desperate and panicked, David dragged James's body to the back of his car. His thoughts were a blur the entire time. What would he do with the body? In the dead of night, David drove out to a remote area far from the city. His heart pounded in his chest, the reality of his actions weighing down on him with every mile. When he finally found a secluded spot, he hastily disposed of James's body, burying him in a shallow grave. As he shoveled dirt over the lifeless form, the gravity of his crime settled in. He had killed a man not in the line of duty, but in a fit of rage over a situation he should have walked away from long ago. By the time David returned home, he was exhausted, physically, mentally, emotionally. The weight of what he had done crushed him, and he could barely stand to look at himself in the mirror. He knew he had committed an unforgivable act, and there was no way out now. The guilt gnawed at him, but the fear of being caught loomed even larger. Every day that passed felt like another step toward the inevitable collapse of everything he had worked for. He couldn't go back, but he couldn't move forward either. In the days following James's murder, David's fear of exposure turned into a cold, calculating resolve. The guilt that had plagued him was overtaken by a grim sense of self-preservation. He had gone too far to turn back, and every part of him now screamed for survival at any cost. His thoughts kept circling back to the same conclusion. Sarah could not be trusted. She had been pushing harder than ever for David to leave Emily, and with James's death, he could see her expectations rising. In his mind, it was only a matter of time before she became a threat to his freedom. Sarah, oblivious to the dark turn in David's mind, remained hopeful. Despite the distance and the growing tension between them, she still believed David would eventually choose her. She convinced herself that the turmoil he was going through was just temporary, a reaction to the stress of the affair and his fear of the consequences. When David contacted her to meet under the pretense of discussing their future, Sarah's hopes were rekindled. She imagined that perhaps the pregnancy had finally convinced him to commit, that he would finally leave Emily and start a new life with her and their child. She agreed to meet him without hesitation, eager to hear what he had to say. The location David chose was a quiet, remote area just outside of Austin, a place where they had often gone during the early days of their relationship. It had once been a sanctuary for their stolen moments together, but now it would become the site of something far darker. Sarah arrived that evening with nervous anticipation, her mind filled with thoughts of the future. As she stepped out of her car, she saw David waiting, his face expressionless. She sensed something was off but pushed the feeling aside, assuming his mood was just another sign of the stress they were both under. She walked toward him, expecting a heartfelt conversation, a moment of clarity that would finally bring them together. David, aware of the gravity of the situation, tried to remain composed. He thought he had meticulously covered his tracks. Playing the role of the grieving lover, David attended police briefings and acted as though Sarah's disappearance devastated him. He made a point to ask questions during the investigation, keeping his ear to the ground to learn about the progress detectives were making. Detectives interviewed people who knew Sarah and James, and soon enough, their attention turned towards David. Several people recalled seeing him with Sarah frequently, especially in secluded spots. Questions were raised about the nature of their relationship. Sarah's friends, though they had no direct knowledge of the affair, mentioned the growing distance between her and her husband, James. Furthermore, James's close friends revealed his suspicion that Sarah was involved with someone else, though they didn't know who. The first major breakthrough came when James's body was discovered, buried in a shallow grave outside of Austin. The discovery shook the city. What had started as a missing persons case quickly escalated into a full-fledged homicide investigation. Detectives immediately knew that James's death wasn't a random crime. It was personal. The forensic evidence gathered from the scene suggested a violent confrontation, and it wasn't long before David's connection to both James and Sarah became clear. David, who had hoped his calm demeanor would shield him from suspicion, found himself in a rapidly unraveling situation. The discovery of James's body triggered intense scrutiny on him, especially since he had been romantically linked to Sarah. The police began to focus their efforts on finding Sarah, suspecting that her disappearance and James's murder were linked. He maintained his role as the devastated lover, but those closest to him began noticing subtle changes in his behavior. His calm exterior started to crack. Colleagues at the police department observed that David had become more withdrawn, paranoid even. He was less attentive at work, frequently distracted, and appeared to be struggling under the weight of something unspoken. The turning point came when a second grave was discovered, less than a week after James's body was found. Detectives uncovered Sarah's remains, buried in a remote location not far from where James had been hidden. The manner in which her body was disposed of, carelessly buried in a shallow grave, bore striking similarities to James's case. But it wasn't just the burial that linked the two crimes. Ballistics tests conducted on the bullet casings found at the scene matched the gun David had used to kill Sarah. On top of that, forensic analysis revealed DNA evidence connecting David to both murders, further tightening the noose around him. The weight of the evidence against David was mounting, and detectives weren't the only ones noticing his erratic behavior. His colleagues had witnessed a significant change in his demeanor following the discovery of James's body. He seemed paranoid, avoiding eye contact, and often made mistakes that were unlike his normally precise self. He was no longer the composed and calculated officer they once knew. Instead, he was visibly unraveling, a man on the edge of collapse. Interviews with David's co-workers painted a picture of a man under immense pressure, though they didn't know why. His fellow officers didn't suspect him at first, but as the investigation progressed, whispers of David's affair with Sarah began to circulate within the department. His proximity to the victims, coupled with his strange behavior, made him a prime suspect. The final blow came when detectives began piecing together the timeline of events leading up to James and Sarah's murders. David's affair with Sarah, which had been relatively secret, was now out in the open. Detectives uncovered text messages between the two, revealing the deepening relationship and the pressure Sarah had been putting on David to leave his wife. They also discovered Sarah's pregnancy, a revelation that tied everything together. In the end, it was a combination of forensic evidence, inconsistencies in David's alibi, and his own unraveling behavior that sealed his fate. Detectives were able to link David to both murders definitively, with the motive becoming painfully clear. He had killed James in a fit of rage and later murdered Sarah to cover up his tracks and protect himself from exposure. The investigation, which had initially seemed to stump the city police force, had reached its conclusion. David had thought he could keep his crimes hidden, but the truth had a way of surfacing, no matter how deep he tried to bury it. The trial of David Parker for the murders of James and Sarah became a national spectacle, drawing widespread media coverage and igniting debates about power, betrayal, and the consequences of infidelity. The combination of David's position as a trusted police officer and his deadly affair with a married woman created a narrative that the public couldn't turn away from. News outlets followed every development, from the lurid details of the affair to the gruesome discovery of the bodies. In court, David's defense team attempted to paint a picture of a man who had been pushed to his breaking point. They claimed that the overwhelming stress of his secret relationship with Sarah, her unexpected pregnancy, and James's confrontation had caused David to lose control. Their argument of temporary insanity suggested that David had acted in a moment of extreme emotional turmoil rather than out of cold calculation. They presented David as a man who had been deeply conflicted, struggling with guilt and fear, and ultimately driven to violence by forces beyond his control. But the prosecution took a very different approach. They argued that David Parker had not acted in a fit of passion but with clear intent. The evidence showed premeditation, the way David had lured Sarah to her death, the calculated disposal of both bodies, and his cold detachment in the aftermath. The prosecution portrayed David as a man whose primary concern was his own reputation, a man willing to commit murder to avoid public humiliation and protect his career. They emphasized the brutality of the crimes, the way David had shot Sarah and their unborn child, and how he had strangled James in a fit of rage. The jury, confronted with the overwhelming evidence of David's guilt, deliberated for only a short time before returning a verdict. David was found guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder. The trial, which had riveted the nation for months, concluded with a heavy sentence, given the brutal and premeditated nature of the killings. The judge imposed the harshest penalty allowed under Texas law: death by lethal injection. The death penalty, a controversial subject in its own right, became a point of contention as the trial wound down. However, in Texas, where capital punishment remains a legal consequence for the most heinous of crimes, David's sentence came as no surprise. The trial ended in 2015, but the consequences of David's actions would continue to ripple through the community for years to come. Austin, once seen as a vibrant city where everyone seemed connected, was left to grapple with the horror of what had occurred in its midst. The shocking double murder and the ensuing trial left a stain on the city's collective memory. Residents who had once known David as a trusted law enforcement officer now saw him as a symbol of betrayal and violence. Emily, David's wife, was perhaps the most devastated by the entire ordeal. Not only had she lost her husband to the crimes he had committed, but she was also forced to reckon with the profound betrayal of their marriage. The affair, the lies, and the eventual murders had shattered her world. Now a widow, Emily struggled to pick up the pieces of her life while raising their children alone. The scandal of David's affair and the brutality of his crimes haunted her, as did the inevitable media attention that followed her family wherever they went. For the city of Austin, the murders and the trial left an indelible mark. Residents who had once felt safe and secure now looked over their shoulders, reminded of the fragility of trust and the dark secrets that can fester behind closed doors. The memory of David, James, and Sarah lingered in the city's collective consciousness, a reminder of how quickly lives can be destroyed when passions go unchecked. In the end, David Parker's life ended in a cell on death row. The man who had once been respected and trusted by his community was now reduced to a symbol of how destructive secrets, lies, and uncontrolled passion could be. As his execution date loomed, the national attention around the case faded, but for those in Austin, the wounds remained fresh. The affair, the murders, and the trial had left a legacy of pain, sorrow, and unresolved questions about the choices people make and the irreversible consequences of those choices. Michael Blackwell was born into a family of modest means, with his parents running a small hardware store in the heart of Lincoln, Nebraska. From a young age, Michael was immersed in the world of small business, learning the ins and outs of running a store. Unlike his peers, Michael didn't just dream of maintaining the status quo. He aspired to create a tech empire of his own. At the age of 25, after graduating from a local university with a degree in computer science, Michael took a leap of faith and launched a cybersecurity startup. Where others saw a saturated market, Michael saw potential. He developed cutting-edge software, rebranded the company, and soon, his product became a must-have in the industry. This success became his blueprint, and over the next 3 decades, Michael expanded his reach, establishing a dominant presence in the tech world. Michael's sharp business instincts were matched by his uncompromising approach. He became known for his assertive strategies, often acquiring smaller startups through enticing deals mixed with subtle pressures. His employees respected and slightly feared him, as he accepted nothing less than excellent. As Michael's wealth grew, so did his taste for luxury. He indulged in collecting rare tech gadgets, drove the latest high-end cars, and split his time between a penthouse in downtown Chicago and a secluded retreat in Aspen. But despite his wealth and success, Michael felt a growing emptiness as he entered his 50s. His first marriage to Julia Harris had ended bitterly after a decade, with Julia decrying Michael's obsessive work habits and emotional distance as the reasons. His subsequent marriage to a former tech influencer, Cassandra Lee, lasted just a couple of years before it too ended in an expensive divorce. Following these experiences, Michael decided against marriage, opting instead for relationships with younger women drawn to his success and lifestyle. During this phase, Michael ventured into the world of exclusive dating services. There, he found a setup that perfectly matched his needs: beautiful, ambitious women who were willing to offer their companionship and affection in return for his financial support. Michael went through several of these relationships, always keeping his emotional distance, ensuring he controlled the dynamics with his influence. Yet, as Michael neared his 60th birthday, he felt the weight of solitude more intensely. He saw in the mirror a man who had reached the pinnacle of career success, yet led a hollow personal life. He yearned for genuine connection, for someone to reignite his zest for life. In this reflective mood, Michael Blackwell first encountered Olivia Hayes. The instant he saw her, youthful, radiant, with a gleam of ambition, Michael knew she was essential. What he didn't foresee was that his pursuit of Olivia would initiate a sequence of events that would lead to his own unraveling and permanently damage the reputation he had meticulously built. Olivia Hayes' journey began far from the bustling energy of Chicago in the quaint coastal town of Camden, Maine. Raised by a single mother who struggled to make ends meet as a receptionist, Olivia learned early that life was often harsh and that her charm could be both a gift and a burden. Her mother's string of fleeting relationships seemed to drain her spirit little by little. Despite her home life's challenges, Olivia excelled academically. She was intelligent and engaging, with a flair for organizing school art shows and events that often put her in the spotlight. Her teachers recognized her potential and encouraged her to think big about her future. But as her high school graduation neared, the stark reality of their finances hit home. There was no college fund, no nest egg to rely on. Determined to break free from the cycle of poverty she had always known, Olivia made a decisive move. With just a backpack of belongings and the little money she had saved from her part-time job at a local cafe, she boarded a bus to Chicago, filled with dreams of becoming a renowned graphic designer and event coordinator. However, Chicago was less welcoming than Olivia had hoped. She found that many others shared her aspirations, all vying for the same scarce opportunities. Olivia ended up waiting tables, much like her mother, and the modest income barely covered the rent for the cramped apartment she shared with 2 other hopefuls. As the weeks stretched into months without any significant opportunities, Olivia's hope began to wane. She was on the brink of moving back to Camden when a serendipitous encounter at the high-end restaurant where she worked changed everything. While serving a table of well-dressed women who radiated assurance and affluence, Olivia overheard them talking about their lifestyles and the lavish gifts they received from their benefactors. Curious and desperate for a financial breakthrough, Olivia approached one of the women after her shift. The woman, named Claire, introduced Olivia to the world of exclusive dating. She explained how young, attractive women like herself could form relationships with affluent older men who offered financial support in exchange for companionship. Initially, Olivia was skeptical. It felt too close to the constrained existence her mother endured, always reliant on others for financial stability. Yet as Claire showcased the stylish wardrobes, upscale apartments, and the perks that came with being in such relationships, Olivia's doubts started to weaken. Encouraged by Claire, Olivia set up a profile on an exclusive dating site. She selected her most appealing photos, penned a clever bio, and waited. Soon, her inbox was brimming with offers from potential benefactors. However, one invitation stood out: an offer to attend a tech conference gala as the guest of one Michael Blackwell. Unbeknownst to Olivia, accepting this invitation would steer her life towards a dramatic turn, permanently altering her fate. The gala's ballroom was aglow with modern lighting, and the sparkle of Chicago's elite on the night Olivia Hayes and Michael Blackwell first met. Dressed in a gown borrowed from Claire and feeling slightly out of place, Olivia scanned the room anxiously until her gaze met that of a sophisticated older man approaching her. "Michael, I presume?" Olivia's voice wavered a bit as she reached out her hand. Michael grasped it firmly, a confident smile on his face. "The pleasure is all mine, Miss Hayes," he responded, gently guiding her into the ballroom. A chill ran through Olivia, born from either excitement or nervousness. She couldn't be sure. As the evening unfolded, Olivia was charmed by Michael. He was engaging, quick-witted, and showed a genuine interest in her dreams. When she shared her ambitions to launch her event planning and design business, Michael's interest intensified. "I have many contacts in the industry," he noted. "Maybe I could introduce you to some key people." By the night's end, Olivia was dizzy, not just from the champagne but from the potential opportunities Michael seemed to offer. When he asked her out to dinner the next night, she agreed without a second thought. Their relationship developed swiftly. Michael quickly began to lavish Olivia with gifts and experiences beyond her imagination. A week after their first encounter, he handed her the keys to a luxury apartment downtown. "You need a proper place if you're serious about your career," he stated as Olivia looked around the expansive, sun-filled rooms in designer outfits filled her new wardrobe. A sleek car was parked in her spot, and Michael's credit card was slipped into her purse for emergencies. It felt like a fairy tale, with Michael playing the role of the generous benefactor, fulfilling her every desire. But, as in most fairy tales, a darker undercurrent lurked beneath the surface. With each gift and each favor he granted, the invisible ties binding her to him tightened. Michael started to orchestrate her schedule, demanding she be available whenever he called. He scrutinized her friendships, especially those with men, his possessiveness thinly disguised as concern for her reputation. Initially swept up by her glamorous new life and thankful for Michael's support, Olivia overlooked these warning signs. It was only much later that she would recognize the real price of Michael Blackwell's benevolence. For the initial months, Olivia Hayes felt as if she was living a dream. Michael Blackwell had opened doors she never thought possible, introducing her to key figures in the tech and design industries and sponsoring her training at a prestigious event planning and design academy. Their first significant trip together was to Nantucket, Massachusetts, where Michael booked the most luxurious suite at a historic seaside inn. Olivia, who had scarcely traveled outside Maine, was captivated by the charm and elegance of the island. As they wandered through the cobblestone streets, Michael presented her with an exquisite necklace, securely fastening it around her neck. "This symbolizes our bond," he whispered with intensity in his gaze. "I hope you'll cherish it always." From Nantucket, they traveled to Aspen, Colorado, where they relaxed in a quaint mountain lodge. Olivia was enchanted by the breathtaking views and the natural beauty surrounding them. In the evenings, over dinners of local cuisine, Michael shared tales of his business ventures, pulling Olivia deeper into his world of ambitious schemes and strategic moves. The small-town girl from Camden was no more. In her place was a polished, sophisticated woman who caught everyone's attention. Michael took pride in showcasing her at social gatherings, introducing her proudly as My Olivia to colleagues and acquaintances. For Olivia, the attention was exhilarating. She began to depend on Michael not only for financial backing but for emotional support too. His approval became essential, his disapproval a source of deep anxiety. When she successfully organized her first major event, Michael was the first person she called, eager for his commendation. Michael, meanwhile, found himself increasingly protective of Olivia. He thrived on her vibrancy and beauty, which seemed to invigorate him. He altered his schedule to spend more time with her, often canceling important meetings for spontaneous lunches or shopping trips. At the start of their relationship, Olivia felt a mix of trepidation and excitement with Michael's assured approach. Their initial moments of intimacy were a combination of hesitancy and passion, with Michael guiding and Olivia eagerly responding. Despite their age gap, Olivia was surprised by their strong connection. As their relationship evolved, their intimate bond intensified. Michael took pride in his attentiveness to Olivia, showering her with care and affection. For Olivia, these moments were complex, a mix of real affection and the awareness of their arranged dynamics. Even as doubts about their relationship surfaced, the attraction between them remained undeniable. However, under the facade of this seemingly ideal relationship, tensions began to rise. Olivia, grateful for all Michael had done, occasionally felt overwhelmed by his omnipresent demands on her time. And Michael, despite his apparent generosity, was secretly worried that Olivia might leave him for someone younger. Unbeknownst to both, the initial bliss of their relationship was fading, with potential storms looming ahead. As the seasons shifted from summer to autumn, subtle changes began to unfold in Olivia and Michael's relationship. The initial thrill of their arrangement gave way to a growing sense of monotony, and for Olivia, a feeling of restlessness set in. Despite Michael's extensive network, Olivia's career in event planning and design wasn't advancing as quickly as she had hoped. The few high-profile events she managed led to more opportunities, but none substantial enough to propel her career forward significantly. She started to question if her relationship with Michael was actually a barrier to her success, as murmurs of being a kept woman circulated in professional circles. One crisp October morning, Olivia decided to indulge in breakfast at a trendy cafe in downtown Chicago. While enjoying her coffee, a charismatic young man at the next table struck up a conversation. His name was Lucas Perry, a 25-year-old aspiring photographer. Lucas's genuine interest in photography and his down-to-earth demeanor immediately drew Olivia in, and soon they were deep in conversation. For the first time in months, Olivia felt a genuine connection. Lucas saw her as a peer, not as a project. When he asked for her number, Olivia paused briefly before handing it over, rationalizing it as simply networking. Over the ensuing weeks, Olivia found herself messaging Lucas frequently. They met for coffee again and then for dinner. Each encounter was supposed to be just friendly, but deep down, Olivia felt she was venturing into risky territory. Michael, for his part, was keenly aware of the shift in Olivia. He noticed her growing distraction, how she became protective of her phone, and her evasive answers about her whereabouts. His past experiences had sharpened his ability to detect a change in loyalty, and his jealousy, which had always lurked just beneath the surface, began to surge. One evening, during a dinner at Michael's upscale penthouse, he confronted her. "Who is he?" Michael asked, his voice steady but his eyes betraying a storm within. Taken aback, Olivia stumbled over her words, but Michael persisted. "Don't lie to me, Olivia. I can see how you've changed. Remember all that I've provided for you." The confrontation that ensued was intense, with Olivia accusing Michael of treating her like an object. Michael, losing his composed demeanor, reminded her of her modest roots and insinuated she would be nothing without him. Following this confrontation, a strained peace settled between them.
Michael intensified his efforts to keep Olivia close, surprising her with gifts daily and planning spontaneous trips. Yet, Olivia felt increasingly confined. The opulence that once excited her now seemed like a lavish prison. Amid these strained days, Olivia made a decisive choice. After a particularly fierce argument, she reached out to Lucas. His voice, warm and non-judgmental, provided a stark contrast to her current turmoil. She confided in him about her arrangement with Michael, her escalating discontent, and her fears about leaving. Lucas listened attentively, then offered a life-altering suggestion. "Leave him. Come stay with me. We'll sort everything out together." As Olivia hung up, she felt both terrified and exhilarated. She knew what she needed to do, but was unaware of the perilous repercussions that her decision would ignite. The day Olivia Hayes decided to leave Michael Blackwell broke with brilliant sunshine, a vivid contrast to the storm brewing within her. She had spent the night meticulously packing a small bag, selecting only items she owned before meeting Michael, and deliberately leaving behind the lavish gifts and designer outfits. Her hand trembled as she wrote a note detailing her decision, her tears blurring the ink. Olivia planned to leave while Michael was out, sidestepping a confrontation she wasn't sure she could endure. But as she approached the door of her downtown Chicago apartment, it swung open unexpectedly, revealing Michael. His usually composed demeanor had given way to a visage of rage and pain. His voice was low and menacing. Olivia's heart pounded as she realized Michael must have had her followed, having anticipated her intentions. She straightened up, summoning all her resolve. "Yes, I'm leaving. This isn't working anymore." What ensued was a fierce verbal exchange that rattled the core of their relationship. Michael swung between anger and entreaties, accusing Olivia of exploitation, then imploring her to stay. He vowed to change, to offer her greater independence, to support her ambitions unconditionally. When his pleas failed, he turned to threats. "You'll never make it in this industry without me," he hissed. "I'll see to that." Despite her apprehension, Olivia held firm. She revealed her relationship with Lucas, her yearning for a normal life, and her desire to find love with someone her own age. With each revelation, she saw Michael's features contort with fury, his hands balling into fists. In a final desperate bid to detain her, Michael seized Olivia's arm, his grip excruciating. "You're making a mistake," he declared. "You're nothing without me. No one will ever love you like I do." For a fleeting moment, Olivia faltered. Fear of the unknown, of relinquishing all she had acquired, nearly overwhelmed her. But then she thought of Lucas, of the prospect of a future shaped by her own choice. Summoning a courage she hadn't known she possessed, she freed her arm. "Goodbye, Michael," she stated firmly, stepping past him and out the door. As the door shut behind her, Olivia was unaware of the transformation in Michael's expression. The hurt and anger subsided, replaced by a cold, calculating gaze. In that instant, as he watched the woman he thought he loved depart from his life, Michael Blackwell resolved on a dark decision. If he couldn't possess Olivia, then no one would. In the subsequent days, Michael's penthouse became a citadel of isolation. He canceled appointments, disregarded calls, and sank into a bleak realm of solitude and whiskey. His thoughts were haunted by visions of Olivia with Lucas, her laughter, once a source of his happiness, now a source of agony. As the initial shock diminished, Michael's emotions shifted from self-pity to vengeance. He had forged his success from the ground up, shaping his fate at every turn. He was determined not to let a young woman and her new lover undo him. Michael Blackwell began to plot with chilling precision and detachment. He realized he couldn't directly orchestrate the event himself. The stakes were too high. He needed someone expendable, someone who could ensure the situation was resolved without any links leading back to him. Through cautious inquiries within the murkier parts of his network, Michael connected with a man known only as Ethan Gray. Gray was akin to a specter, a former military operative turned fixer, revered for his meticulousness and discretion. Their initial meeting took place in the basement of a vacant building Michael owned on the outskirts of Chicago. Ethan, a robust man with a stoic demeanor and steely gaze, listened without emotion as Michael detailed his demands. "It must appear as an accident," Michael stressed. "No ties to me whatsoever." Over the ensuing week, Michael supplied Ethan with details about Olivia's routines, her new address, her daily activities. He had employed a private investigator to monitor her movements, and now that information was poised to serve a fatal intent. Timing was crucial. Michael desired swift action, but Ethan advised caution. Haste could lead to errors, to traces left behind. They needed the perfect moment, a time when Olivia would be isolated and vulnerable. That moment arose sooner than anticipated. Michael learned through his sources that Olivia had secured a prominent client meeting in a secluded part of the Wisconsin countryside. She would be driving there alone, navigating the winding rural roads late in the evening after an exhaustive day. When Michael relayed this information to Ethan, the fixer acknowledged with a somber nod. As Ethan departed to finalize his plans, Michael poured himself another whiskey, gazing out over the city lights of Chicago. He thought of Olivia, her vibrant smile, her ambitions, her departure. For a fleeting second, his determination faltered. Could he truly proceed with this? But then he envisioned her with Lucas, youthful and hopeful, crafting a future without him. His hand clenched the glass until it broke, the shards piercing his skin. He scarcely felt the pain or saw the blood. His decision was irrevocable. Olivia Hayes had to be eliminated. The evening of October 20th brought a crisp chill to Chicago, an ethereal fog enveloping the city like a spectral veil. For Olivia Hayes, the day was filled with anticipation and anxious excitement. She had just excelled at a critical planning session for a major event, and the client had hinted at her securing the lead role for their upcoming high-profile conventions. As she left the meeting, her first impulse was to call Michael and share her success. Her finger hesitated over his name on her phone, old habits dying hard. Instead, she called Lucas, her spirits lifting with his enthusiastic support and genuine excitement for her potential breakthrough. "Lucas, I wish you could come with me tonight," Olivia said as she got into her car, a modest sedan that symbolized freedom after months of being driven around in luxury vehicles. But Lucas had an important deadline on a documentary project and couldn't accompany her to the client meeting in the countryside. "Drive safe," he told her. "Call me when you get there." As Olivia navigated the rural roads, the path dark and shrouded in mist, a sense of unease crept over her. She attributed it to nerves about the client meeting and the persistent worry that Michael might interfere with her burgeoning career. To ease her mind, she turned up the radio, singing along to distract herself from the troubling thoughts. Meanwhile, Ethan Gray was already positioned strategically along the route. He had surveyed the area thoroughly, pinpointing the ideal spot for what would seem like a tragic mishap, a narrow stretch with a dangerously sharp turn and minimal lighting. All that was needed was precise timing. Ethan sat in his nondescript black SUV, engine idling, his eyes on the road with the focus of a predator. When he spotted the headlights of Olivia's sedan approaching, he slowly pulled out, positioning himself behind her. In her vehicle, Olivia noticed the SUV in her rearview mirror. A shiver of apprehension ran through her as she realized her vulnerability on this secluded stretch. She pressed the accelerator, trying to increase the distance between her and the following vehicle. Ethan kept pace effortlessly, closing in. As they approached the critical bend, he executed his plan, accelerating sharply and bumping the rear of Olivia's sedan. The vehicle fishtailed, tires screeching as Olivia struggled for control. For a fleeting moment, it seemed she might regain it, but then her sedan careened off the road, plowing through the underbrush before slamming into a tree. The world spun violently as the car crumpled, its frame twisting, glass shattering. When it finally came to a stop against the trunk, all was eerily quiet. Ethan parked briefly to observe the wreckage from a distance, convinced that survival was impossible. He withdrew a burner phone. "Done," he stated flatly, then tossed the phone into the nearby woods to cover his tracks. But destiny had other plans. As Ethan drove off, certain of his success, he failed to notice the faint signs of life amid the twisted metal. Olivia, severely injured yet conscious, was alive. In a blur of pain and confusion, she managed to extricate herself from the mangled vehicle. Realizing her phone was destroyed, she had no choice but to start crawling, each movement excruciating, fueled by an instinctive drive to survive. As dawn illuminated Chicago,
a hiker made a shocking discovery. The severely injured body of Olivia Hayes, barely alive, concealed in the brush beside a remote rural road. This grim find triggered an investigation that would gradually reveal the sinister motives behind her accident and unveil the dangerous obsession of one of Chicago's most influential figures. Detective Rachel Monroe arrived at the scene just as the morning mist was lifting. A rising star in the Chicago Police Department, Monroe was known for her sharp instincts and unwavering commitment to uncovering the truth. As she examined the crash site, certain details struck her as overly precise. The skid marks on the road, the broken tree branches. It all seemed too orchestrated to be a mere accident. Her suspicions intensified when she discovered the victim's identity. Olivia Hayes, miraculously still clinging to life but in critical condition, was well known in local social circles. Her relationship with Michael Blackwell had been the subject of local gossip for some time. With Olivia now fighting for her life, Monroe sensed that there was much more to the situation. Monroe's initial stop was the hospital. Although Olivia was in a medically induced coma, the medical team provided crucial insights. The nature of her injuries did not align with a typical traffic accident. There were defensive wounds on her arms, indicating a struggle that occurred after the initial impact. Monroe's subsequent step was to interview Lucas Perry, the last person known to have been in contact with Olivia. The distressed young photographer blamed himself for not being with her on the journey. He shared Olivia's apprehensions about Michael, particularly her fears that he might undermine her career following their breakup. Armed with this information, Monroe next approached Michael Blackwell. The tech mogul maintained a composed exterior when questioned, showing shock and sorrow over Olivia's accident. Yet Monroe noted the subtle tightening of his fists, a hint of something sinister in his demeanor when he mentioned Olivia's name. As the investigation unfolded, Monroe and her team uncovered a series of clues. Cell phone records placed Michael in the vicinity of the rural road on the night of the incident, contradicting his assertion that he was at home. Financial records pointed to a significant, unexplained withdrawal from one of his accounts shortly before the event. However, the major breakthrough in the case came unexpectedly. A minor drug dealer, caught in an unrelated arrest, offered information for a lighter sentence. He recounted overhearing a bar conversation about a contract taken out by a wealthy man against his younger girlfriend. The description he provided of the alleged hitman aligned with that of Ethan Gray, a figure known to authorities but not previously linked to any specific criminal activity. With this new lead, Monroe's investigation intensified. She delved into Gray's background, tracing his movements around the time of Olivia's accident. Security footage from a nearby gas station captured an SUV, matching the description of Gray's vehicle, near the accident site. As the evidence started to converge, Monroe experienced the adrenaline surge of a case coming together. Yet she knew that proving the connection between a notorious fixer, a prominent local businessman, and the critically injured woman would require more than just indirect evidence. She needed definitive proof, and crucially, she needed Olivia to regain consciousness and share her story. The breakthrough in the case arrived 3 weeks after the accident, when Olivia Hayes finally awoke from her coma. Detective Rachel Monroe was at her bedside within hours, sensitively eliciting the young woman's memories of that critical evening. Olivia's account became the crucial piece of the puzzle. She recalled the black SUV tailing her, the intentional bump that caused her sedan to careen off the road. With Olivia's testimony in hand, Monroe acted decisively. A warrant was issued for Ethan Gray's arrest, and a SWAT team detained him at a remote cabin. Under rigorous questioning, Gray broke down, disclosing the specifics of his deal with Michael Blackwell. His confession prompted a search of Michael's estate. Hidden within a concealed safe, investigators uncovered conclusive evidence, detailed maps of Olivia's route on the night of the incident, communications with Gray, and financial records documenting the payment for the deed. Michael was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Ethan Gray, in return for his cooperation, received a reduced sentence of 25 years. Olivia, though still healing from her physical and emotional scars, found comfort in Lucas's constant support and the assurance that justice had prevailed.
Today, we delve into the tranquil surroundings of Monterey, California, a locale renowned for its breathtaking coastal views and rich cultural history. The community was shaken to its core when the body of a 21-year-old was discovered under troubling and mysterious circumstances. This is the story of a young groom, a 58-year-old wealthy art collector, and a marriage that ended in tragedy. Jack Thompson was a 21-year-old with a quiet disposition, born and raised in the picturesque town of Carmel by the Sea, just outside Monterey. Jack had recently completed his training as a chef in May 2022, known among his peers as the reserved one who was always experimenting with new recipes. While his friends were advancing in their culinary careers, Jack was still unsure of his path in the culinary world. He dreamed of one day owning his own restaurant, but he was uncertain about how to make his dreams a reality. Jack lived with his mother, Martha Thompson, in a modest home on the outskirts of town. Their financial situation was dire. Martha, a single mother, had struggled to keep them afloat, especially after a series of business failures left them in debt. The weight of their financial troubles bore heavily on Jack, who felt a strong obligation to support his mother. Despite his introverted nature, Jack was deeply compassionate, always willing to help others even as he faced his own challenges. In the week leading up to his untimely death, Jack found himself in an extraordinary situation. He had unexpectedly married Veronica Steele, a 58-year-old renowned art collector, known for her lavish lifestyle and multiple previous marriages. Veronica insisted on an extravagant wedding held at a stunning cliffside estate overlooking the Pacific Ocean in Big Sur. The event was opulent, with luxurious decorations, a gourmet menu, and a custom-made designer gown for Veronica. However, Jack appeared uncomfortable throughout the celebration. He looked anxious and unsure about the drastic turn his life had taken. The sudden announcement of his marriage to the much older Veronica Steele shocked everyone who knew him. Many speculated that his decision was influenced by his mother's financial difficulties, while others feared he might be under undue pressure. Jack's relationship with Veronica was strained not only by their significant age difference, but also by Veronica's controlling personality. She was notorious for her temper tantrums when things didn't go her way, leaving Jack increasingly overwhelmed by her behavior. He confided his worries and fears to his mother, but Martha urged him to stay in the marriage, believing it could secure their financial future. As a result, Jack felt trapped, caught between his mother's expectations and his growing discomfort with his new life. At the time of his death, Jack was still struggling to adjust to his changed circumstance. He had withdrawn from his friends and spent most of his time in the luxurious home he now shared with Veronica. His dream of becoming a successful chef seemed more out of reach than ever. He was a young man who had lost his direction, struggling to imagine a future that felt truly his own. On the morning of August 8, 2022, the peaceful atmosphere of Monterey was shattered by a disturbing discovery. At 8:30 a.m., Doris Miller, a 78-year-old neighbor, was on her regular morning walk when she noticed something strange at the cliffside estate of Veronica Steele Thompson. The curtains were tightly drawn, and the front door was slightly ajar. Doris, who had cherished the tranquility of the neighborhood for over 3 decades, found this unusual, especially since Veronica was known for her meticulous habits and always kept everything in perfect order. Driven by curiosity and concern, Doris decided to investigate. As she approached the house, she called out but received no reply. Hesitantly, she stepped inside and was immediately hit by a strong, acrid odor. It was then that she discovered Jack Thompson lying motionless on the living room floor. His body was slumped over the sofa, surrounded by several empty prescription bottles. A half-empty glass of water sat on the coffee table beside him. Doris stood frozen, her heart pounding. She knew Jack and could barely comprehend the scene in front of her. As tears welled up in her eyes, she quickly pulled out her phone and dialed 911, her voice trembling as she gave the address and described the grim scene. When the 911 operator asked her to check for signs of life, Doris hesitated but then cautiously approached Jack. She knelt beside him and gently shook his shoulder, calling his name. There was no response. His skin was pale, his lips faintly blue, and there were no signs of breathing. Doris's mind raced back to the wedding just a week earlier, where Jack had looked so out of place next to the much older Veronica in her extravagant bridal gown. She struggled to understand how everything had unraveled so quickly. With tears streaming down her face, Doris stayed on the line with the 911 operator until the police and paramedics arrived. The authorities soon confirmed Jack's death at the scene. Doris, shaken and heartbroken, was escorted outside, where she sat on the curb, staring blankly at the estate where Jack's promising life had met a tragic end. The police arrived at the Steele-Thompson residence just before 9 a.m. on August 8, 2022. The investigation was led by Detective Michael Harris, a seasoned detective with the Montreat Police Department, known for his sharp intuition and straightforward approach. Detective Harris wasted no time in examining the scene. Accompanied by Officer Mark Davis, an eager young officer, they entered the home that had now become the center of a tragic mystery. The living room, where Jack's body was discovered, was eerily quiet. The elegant furniture and sophisticated decor stood in stark contrast to the lifeless figure on the floor. Detective Harris immediately noticed the scattered empty pill bottles and the glass of water on the coffee table. He examined the labels, prescriptions for medications like Xanax and OxyContin, drugs commonly associated with overdose cases. The scene was unervingly orderly. No signs of a struggle, no overturned furniture, no blood. The extreme tidiness suggested that whatever had happened wasn't a chaotic, spur-of-the-moment event, but something much more deliberate. Detective Harris instructed Officer Davis to begin photographing the scene, while he called in a forensics team to dust for fingerprints and gather evidence. The medical examiner, Dr. Evelyn Hahn, arrived shortly thereafter to examine the body. She confirmed that Jack had likely died from an overdose, but the amount of drugs present, far above therapeutic levels, indicated that it wasn't accidental. As they dug deeper into the investigation, Detective Harris's attention was drawn to a small but telling detail: a wedding photograph of Jack and Veronica on the mantel. In the photo, Jack's expression was subdued, his eyes downcast, a stark contrast to Veronica's bright, confident smile. This subtle detail suggested that everything was not as harmonious in this newly united household as it appeared. The forensic team meticulously collected the pill bottles, the glass of water, and any other pertinent evidence. They also detected a faint scent of perfume in the air, which Detective Harris recognized as Veronica's signature fragrance, a high-end scent from Chanel No. 5. By the time the initial examination was complete, Detective Harris was increasingly convinced that this case was more than just an overdose. The evidence pointed to foul play, and the investigation was just beginning. As they delved further into Jack Thompson's death, suspicion naturally fell on the most likely suspect, Veronica Steele-Thompson, Jack's 58-year-old wife. Veronica was a well-known figure in Monterey, famous for her lavish lifestyle and domineering personality. Coming from a wealthy background, Veronica had been through multiple marriages, each ending in bitterness. Known for her obsession with preserving her youth and her tendency to lash out when things didn't go her way, Veronica's demanding nature had earned her a reputation for perfectionism. When Detective Harris and Officer Davis visited Veronica's home later that day, they found her lounging nonchalantly by the pool, just yards from where her husband had died, casually sipping a mimosa and flipping through the latest issue of Vogue. Despite the grim circumstances, Veronica appeared disturbingly composed. Dressed in a stylish kaftan and oversized sunglasses, she exuded a detached air that immediately caught Detective Harris's attention. Veronica greeted the officers with a superficial smile that didn't reach her eyes. When questioned about the events leading up to Jack's death, she explained that she had gone to bed early the previous night, leaving Jack in the living room to work on some new recipes. She assumed he had fallen asleep on the couch when she didn't find him in their bed the next morning. Upon hearing of his death, her reaction was muted, showing only a mild expression of sorrow, as if she had learned of a distant acquaintance's passing. During the interrogation, Veronica's story remained consistent, but her emotional detachment raised suspicions. She cooperated with the investigators but kept a certain distance, responding with practiced precision. When asked about the medications found at the scene, Veronica mentioned that Jack had been struggling recently and had prescriptions to help with his mental well-being. She claimed to be unaware of any potential for overdose, suggesting that perhaps Jack had taken more pills than intended in a moment of despair. Despite her composed facade, Detective Harris noted several inconsistencies in Veronica's account. For instance, Veronica had claimed that Jack was working on his recipes, yet the TV, which he often used to watch cooking shows for inspiration, was off when Doris Miller found the body. Moreover,
the bed in the master bedroom appeared untouched, suggesting that Veronica may not have gone to bed at all. The more Detective Harris examined her statements, the clearer it became that Veronica was hiding something. However, without concrete evidence, the police couldn't detain her. Veronica's alibi seemed airtight, but her demeanor cast a shadow of doubt. As the interrogation concluded, Detective Harris remained uneasy, suspecting that Veronica, with her elegant and confident exterior, was more deeply involved in Jack's death than she was letting on. With Veronica Steele Thompson still under scrutiny, the focus shifted to a second suspect, Martha Thompson, Jack's mother. Martha, at 49, had faced a lifetime of hardships. Her life was marked by poor choices, each seemingly worse than the last. Overwhelmed by crippling debt, Martha had turned to selling prescription drugs in secret, a fact known to only a few. Detective Harris, aware of Martha's past arrests, considered how her dire financial situation might have driven her to push Jack into his ill-fated marriage with Veronica. The union promised financial salvation, too tempting for Martha to ignore. When brought in for questioning, Martha appeared disheveled and anxious. Dressed in faded jeans and a worn t-shirt, she was a stark contrast to Veronica's polished appearance. Martha's hands trembled as she lit a cigarette, a habit she had recently picked up again, and her voice quivered as she answered questions. She admitted to encouraging Jack's marriage to Veronica, describing it as an opportunity too good to pass up. She recalled the wedding at the Grand Big Sur estate, where Jack had looked distinctly uncomfortable amidst the extravagance. Martha insisted she only wanted what was best for her son, that Veronica could provide the financial stability she had failed to achieve herself. However, when the conversation turned to the medications found at the scene, Martha became defensive. She denied any knowledge of the large quantity of pills, claiming that Jack must have obtained them on his own. Yet Detective Harris wasn't convinced. Martha's financial troubles, her illegal drug activities, and her desperation to secure a better future all pointed to her involvement. During the interrogation, Martha's responses grew increasingly inconsistent. She initially claimed she hadn't seen Jack for days, but later contradicted herself by saying she had visited him the night before his death. Her agitation and conflicting statements only deepened the police's suspicion. Despite her denials, Martha's connection to the drugs and her apparent motive to maintain Jack's marriage positioned her as a key suspect. Detective Harris knew that Martha was resourceful, determined, and willing to do whatever it took to protect herself, even if it meant putting her own son at risk. As the interrogation concluded, they were getting closer to the truth, but there were still missing pieces to the puzzle. With both Veronica Steele Thompson and Martha Thompson under investigation, attention turned to a third suspect, Harold Monroe, Veronica's ex-husband. At 70 years old, Harold was a successful real estate mogul known for his ruthless tactics in both business and personal matters. His latest venture involved launching a series of luxury developments along the California coast, a project that had significantly bolstered his financial standing. Harold's marriage to Veronica had ended bitterly just months before she married Jack, and their divorce had become a hot topic in local social circles. Veronica had walked away with a substantial portion of Harold's wealth, which had deeply humiliated and angered him. Jack's sudden marriage to Veronica, a much younger man she had recently met, felt like a direct insult. Harold's lingering resentment and envy made him a key suspect in the ongoing investigation. Detective Harris and Officer Davis decided to question Harold. When they arrived at his sprawling estate, they found him in his study, surrounded by blueprints and real estate contracts. Harold greeted them with a firm handshake, exuding an air of calm and confidence. Unlike Martha, who had appeared nervous and unsettled, Harold was composed and seemed almost prepared for their questions. During the interrogation, Harold was cooperative but carefully measured in his response. He admitted his frustration over Veronica's remarriage, describing it as a deep betrayal. However, he denied any involvement in Jack's death. Harold explained that he had been focused on his business ventures and had kept minimal contact with Veronica or Jack since the divorce. When asked about his whereabouts on the night of Jack's death, Harold provided a strong alibi. He had been attending a real estate gala in San Francisco, with numerous prominent individuals able to vouch for his presence, making it difficult for the police to challenge his alibi. Despite his cooperative demeanor, Detective Harris remained suspicious. Harold's overly composed calm felt almost rehearsed, as if he had anticipated their line of questioning. His recent heated exchange with Veronica, witnessed during a high-profile charity event where Harold had ominously warned her that she would regret their divorce, only deepened their suspicions. Although there wasn't enough evidence to detain Harold, his potential motives of jealousy and revenge kept him firmly in the investigative spotlight. The investigation was far from over, and Detective Harris realized they needed to dig deeper to uncover the full truth. On August 15, 2022, just as the case seemed to be hitting a dead end, a crucial new piece of evidence surfaced. It was a mild, sunny afternoon, with clouds beginning to gather over Monterey. Detective Michael Harris was at the station reviewing the case files when Officer Mark Davis rushed in, holding a sealed envelope. It had arrived anonymously at the station that morning, immediately raising suspicion. Inside the envelope was a USB drive. The contents of the drive were shocking. A series of text messages between Veronica Steele Thompson and an unidentified contact, dated just days before Jack's death. The messages outlined Veronica's plan to divorce Jack and disinherit him, using her knowledge of Martha Thompson's illegal drug activities as leverage. The messages revealed Veronica's dissatisfaction with Jack's subdued personality and his lackluster efforts in the kitchen as her spouse, along with her growing eagerness to free herself from the marriage. "His cooking is so uninspired," one message read. "His plating skills are worse than a novice's," another harsh text declared. "If that bleep Martha thinks she can control this bleep, she's gravely mistaken. I'll make sure she and that mediocre bleep chef pay." These texts provided deep insight into Veronica's mindset and intentions. It became clear that she was scheming to rid herself of both Jack and Martha. The messages also hinted at the involvement of a third party, a private investigator Veronica had hired to dig up dirt on Martha's involvement in the illegal drug trade. This investigator had uncovered Martha's history of drug trafficking and was feeding Veronica the information she needed to execute her plan. This revelation painted Veronica as a calculating and vindictive individual, determined to achieve her goals by any means necessary. It also raised significant questions about Martha's role in Jack's death. Was Martha aware of Veronica's plot and acted out of desperation, or was she merely an unwitting pawn in Veronica's elaborate scheme? Armed with this compelling evidence, the police ramped up their investigation into both Veronica and Martha. The case gained renewed momentum as it became evident that the truth was more complex than initially thought. The pieces were slowly falling into place, but the full story was still unfolding. On August 20th, 2022, as the investigation reached a critical point, Detective Michael Harris received a breakthrough after analyzing the text messages found on the USB drive and cross-referencing them with phone records. It became clear that Martha Thompson, Jack's own mother, was behind the deadly scheme. Driven by desperation and greed, Martha had used her son as a pawn in her plot. The police now had enough evidence to arrest her. Martha Thompson, 49, was a woman who saw life as a relentless struggle, burdened by debt and haunted by poor decisions. Martha viewed Jack's marriage to Veronica as her ticket out of financial ruin. She feared that Jack, who had shown little interest in women before, would leave Veronica, shattering Martha's hopes for a steady stream of money. To ensure that wouldn't happen, Martha had been secretly giving Jack prescription drugs and sexual enhancers to keep him compliant and performing, but her plan went terribly wrong when Jack accidentally overdosed, taking far more than she had intended. The twist came when it was revealed that Veronica, unsatisfied with Jack's lack of enthusiasm as a husband, had been planning to divorce him and cut both him and Martha out of her life. She had discovered Martha's drug dealings and intended to use that information to keep them out of her money. But Martha, desperate to keep the marriage intact, took matters into her own hands on the night of Jack's death. Martha had given him a stronger dose of the drugs, hoping to calm him down. But Jack, distraught over his loveless marriage and fearful of Veronica's harshness, took even more pills on his own, leading to a fatal overdose. Martha hadn't meant to kill her son, but her actions directly caused his death. When the police confronted Martha with the evidence, she initially denied everything. Her demeanor was panicked and frantic, a stark contrast to her earlier calm. But as Detective Harris laid out the incriminating messages and phone records, Martha's defenses crumbled. She claimed she never intended to kill her son, only to keep him in the marriage until they could secure their financial future. Martha's arrest sent shockwaves through the small community of Monterey. Jack's family was devastated by the revelation that his own mother had caused his death. The community, already shaken by the bizarre circumstances of the marriage, now had to come to terms with the tragic reality that greed and desperation had led to such a senseless loss. As Martha was led away in handcuffs, she appeared numb, unable to fully grasp the gravity of her actions. The community, overwhelmed by grief, expressed their sorrow and disbelief, struggling to accept what had happened. The arrest marked the end of a dark chapter in Monterey's history, but the pain and shock would linger for a long time. Martha Thompson's trial began in early December 2022. The courtroom was packed with reporters from outlets like the Monterey Gazette and True Crime Daily, eager to cover the shocking details of the case. The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Mark Christensen, portrayed Martha as a manipulative and desperate woman who had prioritized her financial needs over her son's life. Christensen, known for his sharp intellect and relentless pursuit of justice, argued that Martha's actions were premeditated and driven by greed. He pointed to the text messages, phone records, and Martha's own confession as undeniable proof of her guilt. The defense, led by public defender Carita Vasquez, countered by portraying Martha as a troubled mother who had made a terrible mistake. Vasquez, a seasoned attorney known for her compassion, argued that Martha never intended to kill Jack. She emphasized Martha's financial struggles, her desperation to secure a better future for her family, and the fact that Jack's death was accidental. Vasquez appealed to the jury's sympathy, asking them to consider Martha's difficult circumstances and the pressure she was under. Throughout the trial, Jack's family watched in agony. Martha's actions had torn their family apart, and the pain was clear in their tearful expressions. The prosecution's case was strong, but the defense's argument for leniency resonated with some jurors. On December 15, 2022, the jury delivered their verdict. Martha Thompson was found guilty of involuntary manslaughter. The jury believed that while Martha's actions had led to Jack's death, there wasn't enough evidence to prove that she had intended to kill him. The courtroom was silent as the verdict was read, with Martha showing little reaction, her face pale and expressionless. The judge sentenced Martha to 10 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 5 years. The sentence was met with mixed reactions. Some felt it was too lenient, given the tragic loss of Jack's life, while others believed it was fair considering Martha's desperate circumstances. For Jack's family, the verdict brought little comfort. They were left to grapple with the reality that their loved one was gone, taken by the very person who was supposed to protect him. The town of Monterey, too, was left to process the disturbing events that had unfolded in their midst, a stark reminder of how greed and desperation can lead to unthinkable actions. In the months following Martha Thompson's sentencing, the impact of the case continued to resonate deeply within the Monterey community. The trial had left a lasting mark on everyone involved, from the Thompson family to local residents. Martha Thompson was sent to the California State Prison Complex in Sacramento, a high-security facility located near the capital. In prison, Martha faced a challenging environment. Her case had received significant media attention, and she was often the subject of gossip and judgment from fellow inmates. The prison system offered her limited opportunities for rehabilitation and support, leaving her to reflect on the tragic consequences of her actions. Martha spent her time participating in prison programs aimed at addressing substance abuse and mental health issues, hoping to find some sense of redemption and prepare for her eventual release. Despite the turmoil, life in Monterey gradually returned to normal. The town held a memorial for Jack at a local park, attended by friends, family, and residents who wished to honor his memory. The event featured live music and speeches celebrating Jack's life and dreams. It was a somber reminder of the young man whose life was cut short, and it offered the community a chance to come together and support one another. As for the media coverage of the case, it eventually faded, making way for new stories and developments. However, the impact of Jack's death and the subsequent trial continued to serve as a poignant reminder of the consequences of desperation and greed, affecting everyone who had been touched by the tragic events of August 2022.
Fourteen-year-old Aliana DeFries was on her way to school when Christopher Whitaker kidnapped her and killed her inside an abandoned home.
Stephanie, Gabe, right now there was a break in testimony as Christopher Whitaker's attorneys today tried to spare his life.
People going to look at me like a monster. The words hung heavy in the dimly interrogation room of Cleveland Police Department. Christopher Whitaker, a 44-year-old with haunted eyes, continued his confession. "I'm not a monster. I'm just an addict." But monsters rarely recognize their own reflection. On January 26, 2017, as Cleveland stirred awake under a gray winter sky, 14-year-old Aliana DeFries hugged her mother goodbye at a bus stop near East 149th Street. The city was just beginning its morning routine, commuters clutching coffee cups, buses groaning along their routes, and abandoned buildings standing silent witness to the city's decline. No one noticed the man who had been pacing the streets since dawn, waiting. Aliana never made it to school that day. But for 9 crucial hours, no one knew she was missing. The school never called. Her empty desk sat untouched. While her parents went about their day, believing their daughter was safe in class, Aliana was being led down Fuller Avenue toward one of Cleveland's 5,000 abandoned homes, buildings that had long since surrendered to decay and darkness. 3 days later, when police finally pushed open the door of 9412 Fuller Avenue, they would discover just how deeply that darkness ran. The scene inside would not only change a family forever, but would expose a broken system that had failed on multiple levels: a city's struggle with abandoned properties, a school's fatal oversight, and the devastating consequences of letting a predator roam free. This is the story of Aliana DeFries, a purple-loving, doll-playing teenager who should have been safe on her way to school. It's a story about a city's dark corners, a family's worst nightmare, and a killer who blamed drugs for his depravity. But most importantly, it's a story about change, the kind that only comes after tragedy forces us to confront our failures. Welcome to Cleveland, 2017, a city of abandoned dreams, where one morning bus ride would expose the cracks in a system that should have protected its most vulnerable. This is the last bus stop, Cleveland, Ohio, a city that once pulsed with the rhythms of American industry and progress. In the early 1900s, it stood proudly as America's 6th largest city, its skyline growing taller with each passing decade. The streets hummed with the promise of prosperity as automotive giants like Peerless, Chandler, and Winton made their home here. Between the 1930s and 1950s, the population swelled past 1 million, a testament to the American dream made real in steel and concrete. But by 2017, that dream had long since crumbled. Walk down any street in Cleveland's outer neighborhoods, and you'd find the ghostly remains of that golden age. Where factory workers once rushed to morning shifts, abandoned homes now stood like rotting teeth in the city's smile. More than 5,000 vacant properties dotted the urban landscape, each one a potential crime scene waiting to happen. These weren't just empty buildings, they were monuments to decay, their boarded windows and sagging porches telling stories of economic collapse and urban flight. The decline had been brutal and systematic. When the manufacturing industry restructured in the 1960s, it pulled jobs away like a receding tide. The great industrial machine that had built Cleveland began to rust. Housing discrimination and redlining carved up neighborhoods like surgical incisions, leaving some areas to bleed out slowly. Violence followed poverty like a shadow, and by 2010, Cleveland's population had shrunk to just 1/3 of its peak. This was the Cleveland that Aliana DeFries knew, a city struggling to hold onto its dignity while fighting battles on multiple fronts. In some neighborhoods, these abandoned homes clustered together like dark archipelagos. Local residents would hurry past them, especially after dark. They knew what happened in these modern ruins: drug deals, assaults, or worse. Police reports painted a grim picture. These weren't just eyesores. They were predators' lairs. For city officials, the problem seemed insurmountable. Every boarded-up window was a reminder of failed policies and limited resources. The city had managed to reduce the number of abandoned properties from 12,000 to around 5,000 by 2017, but for residents living next door to these hollow structures, even one was too many. Each vacant house was a potential crime scene, a place where screams could be swallowed by empty rooms and darkness could hide unspeakable acts. This was the backdrop against which our story unfolds, a once proud city where abandoned dreams created perfect hiding places for nightmares. And on that January morning in 2017, one of these neglected properties would become more than just another statistic in Cleveland's struggle. It would become the scene of a tragedy that would force an entire city to confront its demons, both architectural and human. In this landscape of urban decay, 14-year-old Aliona DeFries was about to board a bus, unaware that one of Cleveland's countless abandoned homes was waiting to claim its most innocent victim yet. Born on June 12, 2002, in Detroit, Aliona DeFries entered the world as summer was painting the Great Lakes region in vibrant colors. Her parents, Dunshaw Cooper and Damon DeFries, were young and hopeful, dreaming of better opportunities for their newborn daughter. While Aliona was still an infant, they made the decision to cross Lake Erie's waters to Cleveland, believing the move would forge a brighter future for their family. Though her parents' relationship didn't endure, their dedication to their daughter never wavered. Living primarily with her mother, Aliona's world was carefully crafted by two parents who, despite their separation, remained united in their love for her. Damon, her father, never became a weekend warrior or distant figure. Instead, he wove himself into the fabric of her daily life, driving her to school, planning weekend adventures, and serving as the moral compass every young girl needs. Aliona bloomed into what her mother fondly called a girly girl. Purple wasn't just her favorite color, it was her signature. Even as she entered her teenage years, she held onto a pure-hearted joy that made her special. Baby dolls still lined her shelves, treasured companions that spoke to her gentle nature. Around the house, she was her mother's eager helper, approaching household chores with the same enthusiasm she brought to everything else in life. But life wasn't without its challenges. At East Prep and Village Prep Woodland Hills, teachers noticed that Aliona sometimes struggled with her schoolwork. The school suspected a disability, but this revelation never dimmed Aliona's spirit. If anything, it made her work harder. She attended early morning tutoring sessions, determined to keep pace with her classmates. Her disability wasn't a wall, it was simply another part of who she was. The arrival of a younger half-brother added new colors to Aliona's world. She embraced her role as big sister with characteristic warmth, her natural nurturing instincts shining through. Family members would later recall how she doted on him, how her face would light up when he entered the room. Her parents' protective instincts ran deep, perhaps deeper because of her learning challenges. For 14 years, they had carefully orchestrated her movements, ensuring their daughter's safety in a city they knew could be unforgiving. The decision to let her take the bus alone was not made lightly, but the bus stop's location, right in front of a police station, seemed to promise safety. The school's assurance that they would call if she ever failed to arrive provided an additional security blanket. By January 2017, Aliona had settled into a comfortable routine. Each morning, she would don her school uniform, tan pants and a white shirt, and set off for her early tutoring session. She was responsible, reliable, and trusted. Her mother would later say that Aliona never gave them any reason to worry. At 14, Aliona DeFries stood on the cusp of something greater. She was that rare teenager who retained her childhood wonder while beginning to glimpse her adult potential. No one could have known that the careful scaffolding of protection built around her was about to encounter a threat that no one had anticipated. In the end, what made Aliona special, her trusting nature, her innocent heart, her determination to succeed, would also make her vulnerable to a predator who had been hiding in plain sight, waiting in the shadows of Cleveland's abandoned landscape. January 26, 2017, began like any other winter morning in Cleveland. The sky was still ink dark, the air crisp with winter's bite, as Dunshaw Cooper helped her daughter prepare for school. It was 6:30 a.m., and Aliona had an early tutoring session at 7 a.m., a testament to her determination to overcome her academic challenges. The morning routine was familiar, almost ritualistic. Aliona pulled on her school uniform, tan pants and a crisp white shirt, while her mother checked her backpack one last time. Purple folders, neatly organized notebooks, and carefully completed homework were all in place. There was nothing to suggest this morning would be different from the hundreds that had come before. At 6:45 a.m., mother and daughter walked together to the bus stop on East 149th Street, just north of Kinsman Avenue. The police station loomed nearby, its presence a silent guardian that had always provided comfort to Dunshaw. Dunshaw. Steam rose from their breath in the cold morning air as they waited for the bus. When it arrived, Dunshaw watched her daughter board, just as she had done countless times before. She waited until the bus pulled away, its taillights disappearing into the grey morning, carrying her daughter toward what should have been just another school day. The bus's surveillance camera would later reveal Eliana's journey to her transfer point at East 93rd and Kinsman Avenue. She sat quietly, perhaps reviewing her tutoring materials or simply watching the city wake up outside the window. The footage shows her departing the bus at her usual stop, crossing the street with the careful attention her parents had instilled in her. But what happened next would haunt Cleveland for years to come. Meanwhile, life continued its normal rhythm at home. Dunshaw went about her day, secure in the knowledge that her daughter was safe in school. She and her mother had already made plans for dinner that evening. Crawford offered her a promotion, then private training at his island resort. She vanished during the trip. Police found no evidence of foul play. Her family received a generous settlement and a confidentiality agreement. Maria Santos came next. 20 years old, working as a housekeeper in his Miami property. Crawford married her in a private ceremony. 6 months later, her body washed up on a private beach. The death was ruled accidental drowning. The investigator who questioned this conclusion lost his job after allegations of misconduct. His replacement closed the case within days. Ashley Porter knew too much. At 18, she worked in customer service at Crawford's Las Vegas hotel. She discovered financial irregularities, offshore accounts moving millions through shell companies. She threatened to expose him. A week later, security cameras caught her jumping from her apartment balcony. The suicide note, perfectly typed, mentioned depression. Her laptop vanished. The pattern emerged slowly. Young women from struggling families. Jobs at Crawford Properties. Sudden promotions. Private trips to isolated locations. Then silence. Some vanished completely. Others had accidents. A few signed lifetime non-disclosure agreements, relocated to distant countries with generous monthly payments. Crawford's network ran deep. Security Chief Marcus Chen coordinated surveillance and cleanup operations. Financial advisor Robert Walsh handled payoffs and evidence purchases. Hotel managers identified potential targets. Doctors provided false medical reports. Police chiefs buried investigations. Politicians blocked inquiries. The private islands served multiple purposes. Officially, they were exclusive resorts for wealthy clients. In reality, they housed Crawford's darker operations. Underground rooms with surveillance equipment, medical facilities for emergencies, boats ready to move people or evidence. Staff paid triple normal wages for absolute loyalty. Crawford collected leverage like others collected art. Every employee, every ally, every silent partner had secrets he kept. Photos, videos, financial records, insurance against betrayal. Those who cooperated received bonuses. Those who resisted disappeared. His previous wives followed a pattern. Diana Crawford, 1998 to 2000, died in a car accident after filing for divorce. Elizabeth Crawford, 2001 to 2004, overdosed in a hotel room when she threatened to talk. Sarah Crawford, 2005 to 2007, simply vanished during a Caribbean cruise. Rachel Crawford, 2008 to 2010, lives in Switzerland, receiving monthly payments for her silence. Michelle Crawford, 2011 to 2015, survived a home invasion that left her unwilling to testify about anything. The operation moved with terrifying efficiency. Target identification, background research, financial pressure on families, job offers, isolation from support networks, documentation of compromising situations, marriage if necessary, elimination if required. Crawford maintained multiple identities, passports under different names, bank accounts in tax havens, properties owned through layers of corporations. Each hotel contained secure floors accessible only with special keys. Staff learned quickly. See nothing, hear nothing, say nothing. His private security force rivaled small armies. Ex-military personnel. Former intelligence operators. Everyone vetted, paid well, and compromised. They monitored communications, followed family members, erased evidence. No detail was too small to control. The corruption extended to highest levels. Judges who blocked investigations. Prosecutors who lost evidence. Journalists who killed stories. Politicians who changed laws. Crawford didn't just buy silence, he bought systems. By 2022, when Victoria Anderson caught his eye, Crawford's operation was almost perfect. Almost. He didn't count on Sophie Anderson's determination. Didn't expect Detective Blackwood's persistence. Didn't realize his own arrogance would finally break the pattern. Victoria represented something new, a witness who left evidence, a victim who planned ahead. As winter winds howled through Cleveland streets, 3 police officers approached 9412 Fuller Avenue. The search warrant, finally in hand, felt heavy with foreboding. The abandoned house loomed before them, its windows boarded, its structure decaying, one of thousands of similar properties that dotted Cleveland's landscape. But this one was different. This one held secrets. The rear door stood ajar, as if violently forced open at some point. The officers drew their flashlights. No electricity ran through the building's corroded wiring, and stepped inside. Immediately, a metallic smell hit them, one every experienced officer knows: blood. At their feet, a crimson trail began in what appeared to be the dining room. Like a macabre guide, it led them deeper into the house's dark interior, disappearing beneath a closed door. The officers exchanged glances, steeling themselves for what lay ahead. When they pushed the door open, their worst fears were confirmed. There, crumpled on the floor in a pool of her own blood, lay Aliona DeFries. She was wearing only socks. Her school uniform, the tan pants and white shirt she'd put on with such care just days before, lay discarded nearby, stained red. Her backpack, still packed for a school day that never came, sat in a corner, a cruel reminder of innocent intentions shattered by evil. The scene told a story of unimaginable horror. The medical examiner's findings would later reveal the brutal extent of Aliona's final hours. She had suffered severe trauma to both her head and body. Puncture wounds marked her cheeks, while a devastating piercing wound to her forehead had penetrated her skull. A deep laceration carved across her neck told of her killer's savage determination. Some details of the crime scene were too horrific to share publicly, too brutal to speak aloud. But what haunted investigators most was the evidence that Aliona hadn't died quickly. Some of her wounds showed initial signs of healing, a terrible indication that she had remained alive for hours after the initial attack, alone and suffering in the darkness of that abandoned house. The crime scene investigation revealed the instruments of torture: a handheld drill, a screwdriver, and a box cutter lay on the dining room table, their surfaces telling tales through DNA evidence. The precise alignment of Aliona's wounds matched these tools exactly, speaking to the methodical nature of her killer's cruelty. But perhaps the most damning evidence lay in the DNA samples recovered from Aliona's body. In a twist of dark irony, her killer's savage attack would provide the very evidence needed to identify him. The DNA would be run through law enforcement databases, where it would find a match. Not just any match, but one that would reveal how preventable this tragedy had been. As crime scene technicians photographed and collected evidence, a picture emerged not just of a murder, but of a fundamental failure of society's safeguards. This abandoned house, which should have been secured, had become a torture chamber. A registered sex offender, who should have been monitored, had been free to stalk the streets. A school system, which should have called when Aliona didn't arrive, had remained silent. When Aliona's identity was confirmed through dental records, the task of notifying her family fell to seasoned detectives who thought they'd seen everything. But nothing could prepare them for telling parents that their daughter had suffered such a fate mere blocks from where they'd last seen her alive. The abandoned house at 9412 Fuller Avenue had claimed its victim, but it had also exposed the deadly consequences of urban decay, failed systems, and society's blind spots. Now, investigators turned their attention to the DNA evidence that would lead them to a killer who had been hiding in plain sight all along. The DNA match came back with a name that would make veteran investigators' stomachs turn: Christopher Whitaker, age 43, a registered sex offender from Tennessee with a history that read like a warning sign in flashing neon lights. The man who had stalked Cleveland streets that January morning wasn't a stranger to the justice system. He was its frequent guest, repeatedly released back into society despite escalating violence. Whitaker's criminal history painted a portrait of a predator in evolution. In 1998, his first major conviction came for robbery, grand theft, and burglary, coupled with aggravated and felonious assault. Despite the severity of these charges, The case was mysteriously dismissed, the first of many times the system would fail to recognize the danger he posed. But it was his 2005 crime that should have been the red flag impossible to ignore. The details were chillingly similar to Eliana's case. He had lured a woman into his home under the pretense of using his bathroom. Once inside, the facade dropped. He threatened her with scissors, stabbed her in the neck, and choked her before sexually assaulting her. The violence was calculated, premeditated, a dress rehearsal for what was to come. For this brutal attack, Whitaker served just 4 years. 4 years for attempted murder and sexual assault. By 2009, he was back on the streets, now registered as a sex offender. In 2012, another charge surfaced, aggravated theft, but somehow he avoided prison time. For the next 5 years, he walked free, a predator among prey, made him appear more honorable, more desirable. Near discoveries became part of the thrill. Once, a neighbor from Sophia's floor almost caught them in the stairwell. Miguel smoothly transitioned into a discussion about building maintenance, his hand still warm from where it had been on Sophia's waist seconds before. The neighbor walked away convinced she had interrupted a routine tenant management conversation. The building's security system became both challenge and ally. Miguel knew every blind spot, every camera angle. He timed his movements between floors with precision, using service elevators and back stairwells during peak hours. His construction background provided the perfect excuse for his presence in any part of the building at any time. Sophia's diary entries from this period, discovered later, revealed how completely she had bought into his deception. He's so careful with my heart, always mindful of the complexity of our situation. Sometimes I see such pain in his eyes when he talks about his marriage ending. It makes me love him more, knowing how deeply he feels responsibility toward others. What she couldn't know was that the pain in Miguel's eyes was carefully practiced in front of mirrors, his stories rehearsed to perfection, every gesture and expression designed to reinforce his carefully constructed narrative. The playground project neared completion, but Miguel had already established plenty of reasons to remain in contact. His role as building owner-manager gave him legitimate cause to be seen visiting Sophia's apartment. His construction company's ongoing projects at her school maintained their professional connection. Every aspect of their relationship was built on a foundation of plausible deniability. As autumn approached, Miguel began leaving small traces of himself in Sophia's apartment. A spare phone charger, a coffee mug, subtle markers of growing intimacy. Each item was carefully chosen to be generic enough not to raise suspicions if discovered, yet personal enough to make Sophia feel their relationship was progressing. The true masterpiece of his deception was how he used one lie to reinforce another. To Rachel, his frequent presence in the building was explained by his hands-on management style. To Sophia, his irregular hours and sudden departures were attributed to his ongoing divorce proceedings. Each woman's understanding of his situation helped cover his tracks with the other. The affair was now fully established, running like a well-oiled machine. Miguel had successfully created another complete life just one floor above his existing one. It was a balancing act that would require constant attention and adjustment, but he had done this before. What he couldn't know was that this time, his carefully constructed house of cards would eventually collapse, bringing down not just his multiple lives but affecting an entire community in ways he could never have anticipated. As winter approached and the holiday season loomed, Miguel faced the first real test of his dual life management. But for now, he stood in Sophia's apartment, watching the sunset through her windows, identical to the ones in his home below, master of all he surveyed. The perfect deception was complete. The real challenge of maintaining it was just beginning. As winter melted into spring, Miguel's confidence in his deception grew dangerously bold. The service elevator became his personal escape route, his timing perfected to the night maintenance schedule. At 11:43 p.m., when Jose started his rounds from the top floor down, Miguel would slip from Sophia's apartment to his own, the whir of the ancient service elevator masking his movements. The building's gym became their midnight paradise. Miguel manipulated the security logs, creating ghost accounts for late-night access, while teaching Sophia to avoid the main cameras. Their encounters became increasingly reckless against the mirrored walls, in the sauna, their passion leaving steamy handprints on glass that the morning staff would quietly clean away. His business trips were masterpieces of deception. While Rachel believed he was in San Diego, He was actually with Sophia in the penthouse suite he kept for such occasions. When Sophia thought he was at construction sites, he was vacationing with Rachel. The building staff were unwitting accomplices, generously tipped to mention Miguel's inspections at strategic times. The emotional entanglement deepened dangerously. Sophia began leaving her classroom door unlocked during lunch, thrilling to quick, stolen kisses between periods. Rachel received elaborate bouquets at her office, each delivered with handwritten notes that Miguel crafted to assuage his growing guilt. The lies multiplied like cancer cells. To Rachel, late-night building emergencies. To Sophia, complicated divorce proceedings. To the staff, confidential renovations requiring odd hours, building a picture that no one wanted to see but couldn't ignore. By August 25th, the school had no choice but to act. Kevin's suspension from the swim team made the local news, another crack in the facade of Magnolia Heights' perfect veneer. The second blackmail demand arrived on August 27th, $100,000 this time, with copies of text messages that would destroy them both. Sarah withdrew the money without hesitation, emptying an account James had set aside for charity donations. Detective Torres would later trace the money's path through 5 different drop locations, each one leading closer to the tragedy that was about to unfold. She was desperate, Torres would testify, and desperate people make fatal mistakes. The final night, August 28th, played out like a Greek tragedy. Security footage shows Sarah pacing her kitchen at 11:47 p.m., phone clutched to her ear like a lifeline. Her last conversation with Kevin, captured by the pool house security system, revealed 2 people who had lost all touch with reality. Sarah's plan was simple in its desperation. They would run away together, start fresh somewhere no one knew them. She had money, connections, dreams of a new life. But Kevin's response shattered more than just their fantasy. "I'm 17, he said, his voice barely a whisper on the recording. When Sarah protested that age was just a number, his reply would later echo through the courtroom. "No, it's evidence." The silence that followed lasted exactly 42 seconds. In less than 24 hours, one of them would be dead, and the other's life would be destroyed forever. But in that moment, in the quiet of a Memphis night, 2 people faced the reality of what they'd become, and what it would cost them both. The tension in Magnolia Heights reached its breaking point in the final days of August 2018. As Lisa Anderson's email to the school board circulated through administrative offices, the carefully maintained privacy of Memphis's elite suburb began to crumble. That email changed everything, Principal Margaret Rhodes would later testify. When a parent explicitly accuses a neighbor of exploiting their child, we can't look the other way, no matter who's involved. The police tip line, which had been quiet for months, suddenly lit up with anonymous calls. Detective Torres's log from August 29th reveals the community's growing panic. 10:15 a.m. Caller reports suspicious meetings in Mitchell Pool House. 11:30 a.m. Anonymous tip about expensive gifts to a minor. 2:45 p.m. Local business owner reports concerning behavior behind Methodist Church. 4:20 p.m. School staff member expresses concerns about student welfare. But it was the video that arrived in Sarah's inbox on August 30th that sent everything spiraling toward its tragic conclusion. Security footage from her own pool house, somehow accessed and copied, showing intimate moments that left no room for denial. The blackmailer knew exactly what they were doing, Detective Torres would later explain. They didn't just threaten to expose the relationship. They proved they could destroy both lives with a single mouse click. The demand was simple, $200,000 by midnight, or the video would be sent to every phone in Magnolia Heights. Sarah's response, captured by her home security system. In 1998, his first major conviction came for robbery, grand theft, and burglary, coupled with aggravated and felonious assault. Despite the severity of these charges, the case was mysteriously dismissed, the first of many times the system would fail to recognize the danger he posed. But it was his 2005 crime that should have been the red flag impossible to ignore. The details were chillingly similar to Eliana's case. He had lured a woman into his home under the pretense of using his bathroom. Once inside, the facade dropped. He threatened her with scissors, stabbed her in the neck, and choked her before sexually assaulting her. The violence was calculated, premeditated, a dress rehearsal for what was to come. For this brutal attack, Whitaker served just 4 years. 4 years for attempted murder and sexual assault. By 2009, he was back on the streets, now registered as a sex offender. In 2012, another charge surfaced, aggravated theft, but somehow he avoided prison time. For the next 5 years, he walked free, a predator among prey. Made him appear more honorable, more desirable. Near discoveries became part of the thrill. Once, a neighbor from Sophia's floor almost caught them in the stairwell. Miguel smoothly transitioned into a discussion about building maintenance, his hand still warm from where it had been on Sophia's waist seconds before. Showed a woman unraveling. She spent 3 hours pacing her kitchen, making frantic calls to her bank, her lawyer, and finally, fatefully, to Kevin. At Memphis East High School, the whispers had become a roar. Kevin's sudden removal from the swim team sparked speculation that reached far beyond the pool deck. Coach Thompson found himself fielding calls from college recruiters, trying to explain the unexplainable. How do you tell Texas that your star swimmer isn't just slipping? He's drowning in something you can't even discuss. Thompson would later ask the grand jury. Lisa Anderson's worst fears were confirmed when she received an anonymous envelope at the hospital where she worked. Inside were photos of her son leaving expensive restaurants with Sarah, receipts for jewelry, hotel charges from neighboring towns. The final item was a handwritten note. Do you know where your son really is when you're working nights? The confrontation that followed shook the Anderson household to its foundation. Lisa, still in her scrubs from a 12-hour shift, waited up until Kevin came home at 2 a.m. I didn't even recognize him anymore, Lisa would sob during her testimony. When I showed him the photos, he didn't deny it. He just looked at me with these dead eyes and said, "You don't understand our love." By September 1st, the school administration had no choice but to take official action. An emergency meeting was called. A spare phone charger, a coffee mug, subtle markers of growing intimacy. Each item was carefully chosen to be generic enough not to raise suspicions if discovered, yet personal enough to make Sophia feel their relationship was progressing. The true masterpiece of his deception was how he used one lie to reinforce another. To Rachel, his frequent presence in the building was explained by his hands-on management style. To Sophia, his irregular hours and sudden departures were attributed to his ongoing